You can't jump from there, you know. The roof of St. Mungo's Hospital had been turned into a quaint garden of sorts for patients and staff to enjoy, and as Harry was part of the former group today, he decided to spend some quiet time out there, looking out into the horizon. He hadn't intended on jumping anywhere, but apparently staring forlorn at the sky while on the edge of a hospital rooftop could cause a misunderstanding. Who knew? He turned around and saw a girl maybe a couple years his junior standing by the door. She was looking over at him with an unreadable expression on her face. I mean, you technically can jump from there, she continued, but it won't do anything. There are wards around the hospital to catch anyone who tries. Thanks, he replied, but I was just looking. She shrugged. Just thought you should know. He turned back around, resuming his position with his elbows up on the perimeter fence. He had rather wanted to be alone, but he was willing to ignore the girl if the girl was willing to ignore him. A few seconds later, she joined him at his spot, putting her elbows up on the fence as if copying him. Apparently, willing to ignore him, she was not. You're not the most sociable bloke in Britain, are you? She remarked, turning her head to look at him. He didn't move an inch as he replied. Probably not. You might be the most famous, though, she added, tapping her chin thoughtfully. Probably not. She raised an eyebrow at him. Oh yeah, who's more famous than Harry Potter, the boy who defeated Lord Voldemort? He shrugged. Some muggle actor, maybe. Oh, true, I didn't think of that. They stayed in silence for less than a minute before the girl spoke again. So what's so fun about staring at the sky anyway? She asked. Do you want to be a cloud when you grow up? Yeah, she frowned. Really? No. Oh, well, me neither. Nice. A few moments later, the girl let out a groan and removed her elbows from the fence. She turned to look at him squarely, putting her hands on her hips. You're terribly boring, you know that? He shrugged again. Don't care. Well, I do. It's not every day I see someone new, so you can at least try to entertain me while you're here. Aren't there other people somewhere you can bother? He asked curiously. Not really, she replied. I'm not supposed to distract the nurses while they work, and hardly anyone comes up here except for me. Harry looked around once more at the little rooftop garden. It was quite nice. Some philanthropist must have spent a lot of money to build it. That's a shame. It is, isn't it? I suppose most people fit enough to leave the hospital would, leave the hospital, so there aren't too many interested in coming up here. Even the staff don't use it much, since it's a no-smoking zone. Then what about you? Harry asked. You seem pretty fit, why don't you leave the hospital? The girl blushed. You think I'm fit? That's not what I meant and you know it. Maybe, she admitted, but you can't blame a girl for hopping. No one's ever actually flirted with me before. He turned to look at her again, properly taking in her appearance for the first time. She was rather thin and a bit shapeless, but she had a pretty face and silky blonde hair that fell just past her shoulders in waves. All things considered, he thought she was rather cute and doubted her assertion immensely. Sure, he said eventually. You still didn't answer my question. She shrugged. I have to be back at night so they can filter my blood while I sleep, but I'm allowed to leave during the day if I want. I just don't have anywhere to go, I guess. Harry frowned. For some reason, he had assumed the friendly girl was at the hospital to visit someone or maybe treat something mild, but her words suggested something a little more serious. There's nothing you want to do, Harry asked, choosing not to pry about the girl's condition. No one to go visit, she made a complicated face. There are some things I want to do, and a few people I want to go visit, but I don't really have the resources for any of that. Oh. It's not all bad, though, she continued in a brighter tone. I was still able to accomplish something today. The girl pulled a little notebook from her pocket, opened it to the first page, and used a pencil to scratch a horizontal line. Harry tried to peek over her shoulder to see what was written, but she pulled the book to her chest. Hey, she admonished, swatting at him. That's private, you know. Was that a list? He asked. She glared at him for a moment before speaking again. It's a bucket list, she explained. It's all of the things I want to do before I die, and today I was able to do one of them without even leaving the hospital. He raised an eyebrow. And what's that? I met a celebrity, she said smugly. Harry cringed. If meeting a celebrity is on your bucket list, you need to write a better list. Hey, it wasn't at the top of the list, but I take what I can get. They fell into a comfortable silence and stayed that way for another few minutes, the longest stretch the girl had gone without talking so far. Eventually, and against Harry's better judgment, he reopened the conversation. So what else do you have on that list? She perked up. Do you really want to know? No, I make it a habit to ask people questions I don't want to know the answer to. Okay, you don't have to be so snarky, she said, opening her book back up. She perused its contents for a moment, taking care to angle it away from Harry. Well, some of these are sort of embarrassing, but oh, here's a good one. I want to go on a picnic. A picnic, Harry repeated. That's it. What's wrong with a picnic? She asked, a little insecurely. I've never been on one and they sound fun, he shook his head. There's nothing wrong with a picnic. I just thought that it's a pretty simple thing to make happen, and if you wanted to go on a picnic so badly, someone should have brought you by now. Well, if you're offering, maybe you can bring me, she suggested. Realizing his mistake, Harry stiffened noticeably and the girl immediately rushed to cover her tracks. Just kidding. I mean, that would be weird, we don't even know each other. She trailed off awkwardly, and it was clear to Harry that the girl was still holding out hope that he might actually agree. He desperately wanted to say no, but she looked so pitiful staring up at him that he just didn't have it in him to refuse. Fine, he said eventually, sighing. We can go on a picnic. It's not like he had any other plans anyway. Really? She asked, her eyes widening in disbelief. You don't mind, I'm sure you're really busy. You'd be surprised. Anyway, just pick a time and a place and I'll be there. She fidgeted, looking a little bit awkward. Oh, sorry for not clarifying earlier, but I don't really have any means of transportation, so you'd have to take me. In for a penny, in for a pound, Harry thought. Then I'll pick you up from here, he said. Does that work? Yes, can we do it tomorrow? Harry raised his eyebrows in surprise. That's pretty last minute, but I guess if you want. I want, she nodded furiously. I'm on a bit of a clock, and just know that if you cancel on me, I'll come back to haunt you. Well, I wouldn't want that, he said. There's enough haunting me already. What's the rush, though? Ah, that's right, I haven't even introduced myself yet. The girl extended her hand towards him for a handshake, smiling happily all the while. I'm Astoria Greengrass, and I have 30 days left to live. Whoa, Astoria exclaimed happily, looking down at the spread of food Harry prepared. This is incredible, Harry shrugged, feeling a little embarrassed. It hadn't seemed like that much food when he bought it, but now that it was laid out in front of him, it was clear that he had definitely overdone it. It's both of our first picnics, he replied, feigning nonchalance. So I thought I'd make it a good one. The girl sat down on the blanket, practically vibrating with excitement as she got a closer look at everything Harry brought. I don't even know what most of these things are, she said, poking at the little plates of rare and expensive foods. But they look delicious. Imagine my luck that of all the people to take me on my first picnic, it was Harry Potter. Harry watched her with a sad smile. You were probably due for a little bit of good luck, he remarked silently. Since leaving the hospital yesterday, Harry had poked around and found out what he could about Astoria Greengrass and her particular condition. It had been easier than expected. According to the old records he found, the Greengrass family suffered from a rare blood curse that affected one child in every few generations, marking them for death at an early age. No one knew who or what had caused it. And despite hefty rewards being offered to anyone who could break it, the malediction had been hanging over the family's head for hundreds of years now. Medical magic could keep the affected Greengrass alive for a while by filtering the tainted blood out of their body. But even then, the curse would inevitably and inexplicably consume the child when they reached the wizard's majority of 17. An age that, as it so happened, Harry discovered Astoria was now 29 days away from. Can I start eating? She asked, looking up at him with big blue eyes. Of course. He shook himself from his thoughts. Go ahead. Astoria daintily took an empty plate and started filling it up with the assorted foods Harry had set out. He didn't know much about cuisine or cooking, so he had essentially just bought the most expensive things he could find at the market in hopes that it would be satisfactory. What's this? Astoria asked, prodding at something black and pearly with her fork. Harry looked down at it. Caviar, I think. What's caviar? Fish eggs. She made a little gagging noise and pulled her fork back reflexively. Realizing her own rudeness too late, she turned to him apologetically. Oh, sorry, she said. I appreciate it, and I'm sure it's great, but... Harry let out a small laugh. Don't worry, I think it's gross too. Feel free to pick and choose from the spread. Whatever we don't eat, I'll drop off at a friend's house. She heaved a sigh of relief that she wouldn't be forced to eat the squishy fish bobbies and stacked her plate high with bread, cheese, and fruit instead. After a moment, Harry did the same and sat down a few feet away from her. So do you have a lot of friends? She asked, taking a bite from the little sandwich she built. Not really, he admitted. Not many close ones anyway, but there's still a few who haven't given up on me yet, and I'm sure they won't turn down some free food. Even if it's caviar. Especially if it's caviar, he chuckled. Some people really like that stuff, you know. She shook her head, mystified. Some people are weird, I guess. They settled into a silence that was mostly comfortable as they ate, but at some point Harry decided it would be less awkward and decidedly more picnicky if they maintained a light conversation. "So, what about you?" he asked eventually, wiping his hands on a napkin. "Do you have many friends?" She shrugged through a mouthful of food. "A few of the other people in the long-term race, I suppose, but most of them are a lot older than me." Harry raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You don't have any friends outside the hospital? People you knew from school, maybe?" He passively noted that he was getting much more involved in the girl's business than he really ought to, but he couldn't help himself. For someone so outwardly aloof and upbeat, her life seemed like a veritable list of misfortunes. "I never really went to school," she replied casually, crawling over the blanket to grab a few more grapes. "I tried once, but I collapsed in line while waiting to be sorted by the hat, and my parents pulled me out after that." "Wait, you went to Hogwarts?" he asked, stunned. "Yeah, but went is pretty much all I did. I took the train there, stood in line for about 30 minutes, and took the flu back on a stretcher. It was fun while it lasted, though." "I never knew," Harry said lamely. "You didn't try again?" She looked into the distance, squinting against the light of the sun. "I begged my parents to take me back the very next day, but they told me it was too dangerous. They hired tutors at home instead, but I didn't take to the lessons very well, and after a year or two they just kind of stopped." Harry had to resist the urge to make some small exclamation of surprise. The veritable list of misfortunes seemed to grow with every passing minute he spent in the girl's company, but it was a train wreck he couldn't tear his eyes away from. "Then, what?" he asked, unable to contain his curiosity. "Your education finished at age 13? She knocked herself playfully on the head. "Yup, I'm totally untaught and untrained. I mean, I know how to read, and some of the older folks at the hospital teach me about history and stuff sometimes, but I haven't had the most, structured tuition." Harry let that sink in for a while, and Astoria went back to eating grapes. What kind of parents just give up on their daughter's education? He wondered, watching her. And in the first place, why aren't they here on this picnic with her instead of me? Are they not capable of bringing her out, or do they just not want to? "Okay, my turn to ask a question," the girl said suddenly, breaking him out of his thoughts. "What was that magic you used earlier? The one you used to bring us here, I mean." Harry's hand unconsciously moved to feel the wand in his pocket, thinking back to the spell he cast less than an hour ago. It had been a while since he last used magic that powerful, but it still came to him as naturally as it ever had. "It was a little piece of space magic," he explained. "Think of it like group apparition, but a little easier on the stomach. It looked like a door." "It was a door," he said. "From there to here. Can most wizards your age do that?" she inquired curiously. "Summon a door from there to here with a flick of their wand, or is that one of those Harry Potter things?" he grimaced. "It makes me feel weird if you put it that way, but no, most wizards can't do that. In fact, I know very few who ever could, and most of them are dead now." "Then where did you learn it?" she continued, undeterred. "After the war was over, I inherited a few of Dumbledore's old things. Mostly junk, really, but there were a few notebooks in there as well. They were filled with everything he'd been working on for the past century or so, and I studied them pretty deeply for a while." Astoria hummed thoughtfully, and Harry briefly wondered why he was revealing so much to the girl. He dismissed the thought a moment later, deciding that it wasn't much of a secret and that she wouldn't have very far to take it to her grave anyway. They sat around for another hour, picking idly at the rest of the food, but the conversation had mostly come to an end. Before long, the early autumn sun started to fall in the sky, and they both started to pack up their picnic by unspoken mutual agreement. Harry?" He turned to look over at the unusually bashful girl. "Yeah." "Thank you for today," she said sincerely. "I really mean it. You didn't have to do any of this, and it was better than the best picnic I could have dreamed of." "Don't mention it," he said, giving her a small and only partly forced smile. "I'm just glad I could help you cross something off that list of yours." She widened her eyes as if just remembering why they had gone on a picnic in the first place, and pulled her little notebook out of her pocket. She scratched a few more lines into the first page and stowed it away again. "It didn't seem like much when I wrote it," she admitted. "But now I'm really grateful that I did. I'll remember today for the rest of my life, even if that doesn't mean much coming from me." Astoria gave Harry her biggest smile then, and he felt a sharp pang of something in his heart. He quickly swallowed it down. "All right," he said, packing up the rest of their things. "Let's get you back to St. Mungo's." Harry woke up the next day around noon, finally mustering the will to drag himself out of bed when the sunlight filtering through his curtains became too bright to sleep through. He had socially exerted himself the day before and wanted nothing more from today than to hide away from the world for an indefinite period of time. He was setting himself to the task of shuffling around his apartment aimlessly when his doorbell rang. "Ah, geez," he mumbled. As he told Astoria the previous day, he didn't have much in the way of friends, so he could realistically narrow down the list of people who could be at his door to one person. "Hi, Neville," Harry said dispassionately, not even bothering to look up as he opened the door for his friend. "Good afternoon," Neville replied cheerily, inviting himself in. He took one look at Harry and revised his statement. "Though I'm guessing good morning would be more correct." Harry shrugged and made his way over to the couch, flopping down on it as Neville took a seat across from him. They both stared at each other silently for a moment, and Harry wondered what it might take to get him to leave. It wasn't that Harry didn't like Neville. Nothing could be further from the truth. His friend from school had grown into a reliable ally, and one of the very few people left in the world he could actually trust. Far from the bumbling dunce of a kid he was when Harry had first met him, Neville had grown into a tall, powerful, and handsome young man with talent in spades and patience in droves. And in the year since the war he had only continued to blossom. Harry just didn't feel like putting up with Neville's attempts to help him at the moment, and there was also a small part of him that held an immature resentment towards the boy that had blossomed where he had withered. "So," Neville started, breaking the silence, "are you going to explain why you left a half-eaten picnic basket on my doorstep last night? You can throw it out if you don't want it." "Oh, no," Neville laughed. "I want it." Hannah was ecstatic to see the caviar, so we're both grateful. "I just thought I'd like to know what you were doing with a picnic basket. Surely you don't mean to tell me that you ate the other half of its contents?" Harry shrugged. "I like to have fun just as much as you do," he intoned flatly. Neville smiled gently, and Harry felt affection and distaste rise up in equal measure. "Can I ask who you were with?" his friend probed. "You can ask. Will you answer?" "No." Neville sighed, but that damnable smile didn't leave his lips. "That's fine. I just want you to know that I'm happy about it, and I'm happy for you, Harry. I hope you had a good time." "It was all right." Harry fidgeted uncomfortably as Neville continued to stare at him silently. Any moment now, Harry knew, he'd start dispensing unsolicited advice. "So is there any chance of a repeat performance?" he asked eventually. Neville sighed again, and this time his smile faded a bit. "There's nothing wrong with allowing yourself to be happy, you know," he said, fixing Harry with a more serious but not unkind expression. "If you enjoyed your picnic, you should go on another, or bring your picnic buddy somewhere else. Either way is fine, but it's important that you stay connected with people. That's what they—" "I get it," Harry said, cutting him off. "And I'll try, okay? But I don't need you breathing down my neck about it." Neville pursed his lips as he looked at him, and Harry could tell that he was debating driving the point further. "All right, Harry," Neville said instead, standing up from his seat. "That's all I wanted to say. Sorry for disturbing you this early in the morning, and please do keep in mind what I said." With that, Neville bid him a good day and left his apartment. "What a bother," Harry mumbled, changing his posture on the couch so he was lying on his side. He felt incredibly uncomfortable as he lay there, but the source was internal rather than external. If he were being honest with himself, Neville had probably been relatively accurate with his assessment. Harry wasn't quite feeling happy, and he wasn't even sure if he could say that enjoyment had been his primary sensation during the picnic, but he had felt something. And as both Harry and apparently Neville knew, Harry wasn't a huge fan of feeling things lately. It was easier to lie on his couch and stare at the wall. He spent the better part of the afternoon doing just that, but unlike the regret and self-loathing that usually assaulted him in those moments, he found his thoughts drifting back to Astoria, a girl that, in many ways, had a much rougher go of things than he did. "It was better than the best picnic I could have dreamed of. I'll remember today for the rest of my life." While her life was anything but, Astoria's energy and optimism were enviable. She had less than a month left to live, but had still thanked Harry as if he had done her some great service by taking her on a lousy picnic. Far from the entitlement most would develop in her position, Astoria maintained a simple humbleness that was both endearing and heartbreaking. And yet here I am, wasting away on my living room couch, Harry thought. I wonder how much Astoria would be able to do if she were in my position. She'd be able to finish up that list of hers pretty easily. Anyway, He recalled the smug grin on her face when she crossed, meeting a celebrity off her bucket list, and how happy she had looked when he agreed to go on a picnic with her. A few hours later, when his third missed meal of the day had come and passed, he finally pulled himself off the couch again with a sigh. "Ah, geez," he mumbled for the second time that day. Astoria sat on a bench on the roof of St. Mungo's, enjoying the feel of the evening breeze on her skin. The season was turning, and it was starting to get a bit chilly, but she wasn't bothered. The cold air helped clear her mind, which had been uncharacteristically cluttered as of late. She moved from the bench to the edge of the roof, putting her arms up on the fence as Harry had done the other day. She didn't know what was so fun about staring into the sky, but it felt appropriate tonight for some reason. "Am I a selfish girl?" she asked herself quietly. "Is it bad that I got so much and yet still want more?" A few moments later, she shook the thought from her head and pulled herself away from the fence. She knew there was something wrong when she was getting introspective. Resolving to sleep her strange mood away, she turned around and headed to the door that led back into St. Mungo's. She only made it a few steps before a familiar voice called out to her. "Hey." Astoria spun, nearly dizzying herself from the speed of the action. "Harry?" she asked disbelievingly. She rubbed her eyes and blinked hard, wondering if her imagination was playing a prank on her. As her eyes readjusted, though, the older boy was still there. She hadn't heard him come up, but realized a moment later that a wizard who could summon doors from there to here hardly needed to climb stairs to reach a roof. For a second, she almost thought he looked a little nervous as he stood before her, his hands in the pockets of an oversized sweater, but then the moment passed and he gave her a smile. "What's next on your list?" he asked. "Huh," she replied inarticulately, now not believing her ears along with her eyes. "We have to get through that bucket list of yours, and we don't have too much time left to do it, right? So I'm asking what we're doing next." Her eyes widened. "Really? Really?" Laughing gently at the expression on her face, he walked over to the edge of the roof, putting his arms up on the fence and looking out to the sky above. Still in a shocked stupor, she made her way over to the fence and did the same. This time, as she stared up into the sky, she felt like she might be starting to understand what was so fun about it. "This sucks. Yep. Why did we come here again? It was on your list," Astoria sighed. The two had gone to a Muggle nightclub, something Astoria had heard about but never experienced firsthand, and neither were particularly impressed. The music was so loud they couldn't hear a specific melody over the rhythmic thud of the speakers, and the sweaty clash of bodies was more repulsive than energizing. "Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking." "Well, I suppose it was worth a try," he said. Despite the fact that Astoria was a month shy of 17 and could hardly pass for much older, she had apparently been deemed attractive enough by the bouncer to be let in without identification. Harry wasn't sure where morality stood on that matter, but he figured if the girl wanted to know what it was like to go to a nightclub before she died, he could let ethics be waived. "I just thought there would be more, like dancing," Astoria said, looking at the throng of writhing people. "Honestly, me too. Not that I'm much a fan of dancing, mind you, but it's probably a whole lot better than whatever those guys are doing." The two had pushed to the furthest extremity of the club, where a few couches sat just far enough from the speakers to allow for conversation. It was relatively early in the night, but the club was still packed full with people. Astoria turned to look at Harry then, and not for the first time, he felt a certain fondness well up in his heart. She had clearly tried her best to pretty herself up for tonight, but light makeup that wasn't perfectly applied and a pair of clothes that weren't quite form-fitting gave her an innocent charm that couldn't be faked. "So you don't come to these types of places often," she guessed. Harry shook his head. "Hardly ever. I've been with acquaintances a couple of times in the past, but never had enough of an interest to make a point of returning." "I totally get that," she said, leaning back and sinking gracelessly into the couch. A few minutes of staring at the dance floor later, Harry stood up and turned to face her. "Well, there's no point staying here any longer, is there?" he asked. "I guess not," she shrugged, scrunching her nose. "But I don't really feel like going back yet." Harry checked his watch. "We don't have to be back at St. Mungo's for another couple hours. If you'd like, we can check out another place first." "Another nightclub?" "Not really. It's a different sort of club, and one you might like better." She agreed, and they made a tactical retreat from the establishment, both taking grateful breaths of fresh air as they traded the stuffy club ventilation for the early evening breeze. Harry led her a few streets down, glad the girl had either the sense or lack of alternatives to wear comfortable footwear. and it wasn't long before they reached their next destination. From where they stood on the street next to the new venue, they could hear the sounds of a different sort of music drifting up from a narrow set of stairs. "And what's this?" Astoria asked suspiciously, peering down the stairs and spotting a door. "This is a jazz bar," he said proudly, gesturing with his arm. "Jazz, like the music." "Yep." She followed him down, and as he opened the door, the sounds and energy from the little place hit them like a truck. A group of 4 musicians stood on a small stage furthest from the door, and several dozen people were sitting at tables in front of them. There was a light din of conversation, and the sounds of glasses clinking, but most of the clients were focused on the music, and a passion for the arts that wouldn't have been found with a microscope in the nightclub was palpable in every inch of the place. "Whoa," Astoria said, looking around in bewilderment. "I had no idea something like this even existed." "Most don't," Harry admitted, acknowledging a waitress with a wave and finding 2 open seats at the bar. "I just happened to stumble upon it myself a few months ago, and I found myself back a couple of times since." Astoria raised her eyebrows in surprise as she took a seat beside him. "Really? By yourself?" He nodded. "There's something about it that comforts me. I think knowing that there are people out there who dedicate their lives to art, sometimes to the exclusion of all else, it gives you perspective." Seeing the girl's puzzled expression, he continued. "Remember when we first met, and you said I might be the most famous bloke in Britain? Well, these guys," he said, pointing at the musicians on the stage, "they couldn't care less about me. They don't know the names of movie stars, and most of them don't even follow politics or sports. All they care about is performing and improving their craft, and we're all here to listen to them." Astoria's eyebrows were still furrowed, but her expression cleared up slightly. "And you like that? Feeling unimportant?" "I do. It's been over a year since I killed Voldemort, and even before that it felt like the eyes of the entire wizarding world were on me. I thought I'd finally get a break after the war, but then the very next day everyone just expected more of the same from me." "Is that why you dropped off the map?" Harry narrowed his eyes suspiciously at her, and she shrugged. "I read the newspaper, at least," she said defensively. "For the first few months after the war you were always running around, starting charities and trying to reform the government and stuff. But then one day you just kind of stopped. It's all they talked about in the Daily Prophet for a while." He gazed off, pretending to listen to the music. "Yeah, that's part of it," he said eventually, though he didn't turn back to look at her. "I burnt out. I'd been so focused on the war for so long that I never actually stopped to think about what I wanted to do after it. I spun my wheels and followed the momentum for a while, but that could only ever take me so far." "And now?" Astoria asked, staring intently at him. "Do you know what you want to do now?" He shook his head. They spent the better part of the next hour listening to the band in silence, both enjoying the music and the opportunity to be in their own heads. At one point, the waitress from earlier stopped by their table and brought a beer and an apple juice to Harry and Astoria respectively. Eventually, Astoria's curfew approached and they prepared to leave, but not before she took out her book and crossed off another line. "Well, the nightclub was a bit of a bust, but I did like this jazz place," she decided. "Thank you once again, Harry. I really mean it." He shrugged it off, and they both returned to the street. The air was a little chillier than it was when they arrived, and Astoria shivered as a gust of wind blew past her face. Noticing her reaction, Harry put a hand on her arm, and a moment later she felt a pleasant but unnatural warmth course through her body. "Ah, was that magic?" she asked, a little startled. "A bit. Did it bother you?" "Oh no, not at all," she said, waving her hands. "But how did you do it without a wand?" He shrugged. "I don't need a wand for the simple stuff." Astoria briefly wondered if warming another person's body to the correct temperature was really considered simple by most, or if it was just another one of those Harry Potter things, but her mind soon returned to other thoughts. Namely, thoughts that had been floating around since Harry's surprise visit on the rooftop last night. Harry," she started tentatively after a few minutes of silent walking. "Are you sure you still want to help me with my bucket list? I'm grateful for everything you've done so far, but I won't hold it against you if you get bored and want to stop." Her words trailed off as he reached over and ruffled her hair, an action that caught her off guard and caused her heart to flutter inexplicably. "I wouldn't have offered to help you if I didn't want to," he said warmly. "So stop being modest and allow yourself to be selfish for a little while." "I guess," she blushed, using her hands to fix the hair that Harry had messed up. "But I don't want to feel like I'm just another one of your charity cases." Harry frowned, and his expression grew more serious. He turned to face her properly, looking into her eyes as he spoke. You're not a charity case, Astoria, and I don't want to hear you say that ever again. I enjoyed myself tonight, and I'm spending time with you because I want to and for no other reason. You're a fun person to be with, and you should have a little more confidence. Okay, she nodded, and this time the warmth that flooded her body wasn't from magic. Besides, Harry added, in a lighter tone this time, I'm starting to get invested in seeing that silly list of yours completed. Hey, she protested, feigning offense. It's not a silly list, that's my bucket list you're talking about. She humphed indignantly and crossed her arms, but as they walked the rest of the way to St. Mungo's, Astoria couldn't do anything to hide the happy smile on her face. That was amazing, Astoria exclaimed excitedly. Which one should we go on next? She looked at Harry, but he was already limping over to a bench, his face pale. He sat down and promptly buried his head in his hands. Ooh, he groaned. Wait, seriously, she said, raising an eyebrow. You're fine with broomsticks and space magic, but you get sick after one roller coaster ride. Harry groaned again. I can control brooms and magic, but I can't control a roller coaster. I don't like being at the mercy of a machine. But they're so much fun. Then you can go on the next one without me, he said, shooing her away with a hand. I'll be here when you're done, but I don't want to go alone. Harry glanced around the amusement park, wondering if there were any rides they could go on that wouldn't make him throw up. What about that? He asked, pointing at a building in the distance. Want to go there? Astoria blanched. The haunted house, I'd rather not. You can't handle scary things. It's not that I can't handle them, I just don't like them. Right. Eventually, they met in the middle and settled on bumper cars. It was exciting enough for Astoria, but calm enough for Harry. After that minor success, he was emboldened to try the spinning teacups, but spent 10 minutes regretting his decision over a garbage bin in the washroom immediately after. You're a bit of a baby sometimes, Astoria said once he came out again. Kind of surprising for the boy who won. I'm not a baby, he gritted out. I just hate the teacups. Kind of like how I hate haunted houses. Exactly like that. I guess it's a good thing none of your enemies ever thought to take you on a thrill ride, Harry shivered. If any of them did, the war would have ended much differently. They walked around a bit longer, stopping at the concession stands for snacks until Astoria pointed to something on the horizon. What about that one? She asked. Even you could probably manage that, couldn't you? As it turned out, Harry couldn't quite manage the Ferris wheel, but he could fake it well enough to pretend he was fine in front of Astoria, even if he desperately wanted to jump out of the box and apparate back to Earth. Whoa, she said, staring out the windows with unreserved awe. This is a marvelous view, I bet it looks amazing at night. We could come back another time, he offered, incidentally. He really hoped she didn't take him up on that invitation. She shook her head. Nah, we don't have time. If you're helping me get through my bucket list, I can't waste an opportunity by doing something twice. I still have a lot to get done before I die, you know. Harry glanced at her, and the sadness came back. Sometimes he almost forgot she was sick. For lack of a better word, Astoria seemed so full of life, and the thought that she was going to die at the end of the month seemed unreal to him. So unreal that he occasionally wondered if she'd really die at all. Maybe Astoria would break the trend and be the first Greengrass to survive the blood curse. Harry, she asked, snapping him out of his reverie. Why are you staring at me? It's nothing, he said, glancing away. She narrowed her eyes. You're lying, are you scared of the Ferris wheel after all? Of course not, he said, but the hesitation in his voice betrayed him. Astoria burst out laughing. Oh my God, Harry Potter can't handle a Ferris wheel. Whatever, he mumbled, blushing. Seriously, Harry, she giggled. A Ferris wheel. I have to say, I really wasn't expecting this from you. That's why I didn't tell you where we were going until this morning, Astoria replied happily. I wanted to surprise you with how rebellious I can be, Harry shrugged. Getting a tattoo isn't that rebellious these days, unless you're planning on getting the dark mark or something. Hey, don't even joke about that. So what are you going to get? Harry asked curiously, looking at the art on the tattoo studio's wall. Don't worry about the size or anything, I'll pay for whatever the little rebel wants. She didn't reply, so Harry turned to her. Astoria's eyes were wide with panic. Harry's jaw dropped. Don't tell me you didn't decide what tattoo you wanted before we made the appointment. I forgot, she cried. You forgot. What did you have in mind when you wrote it on your list? I never actually thought about the design. I just knew I wanted a tattoo, and I didn't really think past that because I didn't think it would ever happen. Harry sighed and looked at his watch. All right, we have 5 minutes to decide, unless you want to cancel, of course. No canceling, just let me think. They sat in silence for a minute or two before Astoria turned to Harry with a smile. I could get your name tattooed across my chest. Absolutely not, Harry declared, crossing his arms. That's weird on so many levels, and there's no way I'm paying for that, Astoria deflated. Then a tramp stamp, he raised an eyebrow at her. I'm surprised you even know what that is. Are you kidding? I spent most of my life in and out of hospitals. I basically grew up on girls' magazines and movies. That does make sense, he conceded. Well, I guess you could get one if you want. Nah, it was just a joke. The minutes passed silently, and eventually the tattoo artist they had booked with was ready for them. She was a comely young woman with short pink hair and limbs that were totally covered in ink, and she gave Astoria a pleasant smile as she approached. Hi there, she said in a chipper voice. Astoria, right? Did you bring a design, or did one of my flashes interest you? Astoria said, furiously scanning the art on the wall. That one. She abruptly pointed to a little cartoon otter, and Harry had a sneaking suspicion she had just chosen it at random. Perfect, the artist said. Have you thought about where you want it? Astoria froze, and Harry had to resist the urge to slap himself on the forehead at her complete lack of preparation. How about on my ribs? She said eventually. The artist shrugged. That placement tends to hurt a bit more than others, but it's up to you in the end. Sounds good to me. Astoria smiled, and they followed the artist to her workstation. She pulled the privacy curtains around to cover them as Astoria went to lie down on the client chair, and Harry took a seat on a guest chair beside her. All right, take your shirt off and I'll place the stencil. This'll be your chance to let me know where to move it and how big to make it. Astoria nodded, but as she went to take her shirt off, she paused, as if just remembering who she was in the company of. She glanced over at Harry and he looked away awkwardly. I'll come back later, he said. He moved to get out of the chair, but Astoria stopped him. Wait, she said, grabbing his hand. It's kind of scary on my own. Can you stay and just not look too much? Harry nodded stiffly and sat back down, being extra careful to tilt the chair away from her. The artist raised an eyebrow at them. So, the stencil. It didn't seem like that hurt at all, Harry said to Astoria once they had paid the woman and left the studio. Astoria shrugged. I've had to go into the hospital for major operations since I was a kid. A little tattoo needle doesn't really faze me at this point. Harry got lost in that thought for a while, regretting his words, when Astoria spoke up again. The worst part was you, actually, she said with a shiver. Feeling your lecherous gaze made me feel all gross and dirty inside. It was like you'd never seen a bra before. Seriously, he gave her an incredulous look. Even if I wanted to look, you don't have anything to look at. Astoria blushed, clutching her chest. Hey, that means you were looking, pervert. She turned away from him and he laughed, gradually fading into a comfortable silence as they continued walking along the street. He really hadn't been looking at her, and he was pretty sure she knew that too. Harry couldn't deny he was growing fond of the girl, but that and this were totally different things. So an otter, huh? He said eventually. That's pretty random. I hope you don't regret it. I don't have long to regret it if I do, she replied casually. But it wasn't actually all that random. He turned a questioning look on her and she smirked. Potter. What, Potter? No, yup. Harry really did slap himself on the forehead this time. You got a tattoo of an otter on your ribs because otter sounds like Potter. Hey, what's wrong with that? Even if the reason was dumb, it's still as good a tattoo as any. She partially lifted her shirt as if to prove her point, showing Harry the little Potter otter on her ribs. It was still covered in the clear aftercare wrap, but he had to admit that it was a good tattoo. And somewhere deep within himself, he did like that she chose it for him. He sighed, shaking his head. You're ridiculous sometimes. Only Harry wasn't entirely sure which one of them he was talking about. Yikes, Astoria said, looking around Harry's apartment. This place is more depressing than the hospital. He glared at her. Do you want to bake a cake or not? No, please, I want, she bowed in apology. I didn't mean what I said. It's a wonderful home you have here. Very chic. That's what I thought. It was true that Harry's apartment was a bit desolate. He had moved in about half a year ago and barely bothered to furnish the place since. He had a couple of chairs, a table, a couch, and a bed, but otherwise had very little, providing a homey atmosphere. It didn't help that most of his meager belongings were tucked away in his room to keep the place tidy for Astoria's visit, and his usually bare pantry was stocked with only what they needed to clear the next line on her bucket list. So how do we start? She asked, heading straight to his kitchen. Come to think of it, have you ever actually made a cake before? can't be too different from making a potion, he said as he followed her in. And I was pretty good at those in school. Start by washing your hands and we'll follow this recipe I found. It should be simple. She did as instructed, and Harry opened up the cookbook he bought yesterday to the correct page. All right, we have to start by creaming the butter and sugar, he read. Do you think you can handle that? Astoria looked up at him with wide, clueless eyes. What does creaming the butter and sugar mean? Harry thought for a moment. I'm not actually sure. Should we, add cream? She suggested. The recipe doesn't call for cream, though. Then how are we supposed to cream the butter and sugar? After a while, Harry shook his head. I really don't know. We have milk. Maybe we could add that instead. Astoria shrugged. Good enough for me. She put the butter and sugar in a bowl, pouring milk over top of it. Following the next direction in the book, they cracked 2 eggs and after picking out the shells, added some vanilla. More vanilla, Astoria requested after Harry had measured out 1 teaspoon. I love vanilla, but the recipe only calls for 1 teaspoon, he said hesitantly. It's not enough, more vanilla. He poured a bit extra from the bottle into the bowl, but Astoria leaned over and pushed his hand up, causing about half the contents of the entire container to fall in. Whoa, Harry said, pulling the bottle away. That's definitely too much. It'll be fine. Everyone likes vanilla. It already smells great. They finished by adding the flour and baking powder, but their final batter was rather more wet than they were expecting. This looks wrong, Harry said, sloshing the batter around in their mixing bowl. It kind of looks like cereal, Astoria provided. Yeah, that's why it looks wrong. I mean, if it's too wet, we can just add more dry, right? Harry nodded. That's logical. They added a bit more flour and baking powder, and Astoria aggressively mixed it until their cereal started to look more like porridge. That's a better batter, Astoria declared confidently, spots of cake mixture all over her face and clothes. Very bad or why? Harry wasn't convinced, but he put it into the oven nevertheless, turning the temperature up to the desired heat and starting a timer. All right, go get cleaned up, he said, trying not to laugh at the sight of the begrimed girl in front of him. This should be done in 30 minutes. An hour later, Harry and Astoria sat at the table, their cake in front of them. I'm sorry, Astoria started. No, I'm the one who should be sorry, Harry said shamefully. I didn't actually do any research beyond finding the recipe, and I think that was a mistake. They both fell into silence, staring at the misshapen and sloppy thing that was supposed to be a cake. When they had first taken it out of the oven, it was still raw in the middle, but by the time the center was finished cooking, the cake had become rather burnt on the exterior. It now smelled like a vanilla bean that had a run-in with a nuclear reactor, and neither particularly wanted to try it. I guess we can try making another, Harry said eventually. I don't really want to eat. Wait, you're seriously going to taste it. He watched in shock as Astoria broke a piece of the cake off with her fork and put it in her mouth. She chewed a total of 1 time before spitting it back out on her plate. Bleh, she spat. That's disgusting. Who made that? We made that, he reminded her. Oh, right, wow, we suck, Harry sighed. So should we redo it? I can run out to the store quickly to get some more butter. Nah, Astoria said. It's like I said the other day, we don't have time to redo anything. Even if it was a bad one, I still made a cake, so now I can cross it off my bucket list. That sounds reasonable, he exhaled, standing up. Well, I'll clean this mess up if you want to go relax on the couch and wait for me. She looked up at him, raising an eyebrow. Aren't you forgetting something? What? You have to try the cake too, of course. Harry looked down at it. Do I have to? Yes. I tried it, so it's only fair. Bracing himself, Harry took Astoria's fork. He broke off as small a piece of cake as he could manage and brought it to his mouth. He chewed for a moment and then swallowed. Hey, it's really not as bad as I was expecting. Astoria stared at him in shock. Seriously, what kind of taste buds do you have? Harry woke up in the morning feeling lighter than he did the week before. He had to admit he was enjoying the time he had been spending with Astoria lately, and he was opening up to her about things he hadn't told anyone in a long time. Something about her disconnected naivety made him feel like he was safe sharing with her, and her inevitable transience helped ward off any creeping feelings of commitment. He dragged himself out of bed with slightly less regret than normal, threw on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, and brushed his teeth. Sometimes Astoria told him what their plan was in advance, but she hadn't given him any clues the day prior, so after cleaning up he made off to St. Mungo's to pick her up. The hospital staff have been giving me strange looks lately, he thought to himself as he walked down the streets of London. It might be time to make another donation. He didn't blame them for thinking it was odd that he took out a sick girl a couple years younger than him every day, but he'd rather be known as the eccentric philanthropist than the celebrity creep. Harry stopped first by the rooftop, where he often found the girl waiting for him, but the little garden was empty when he got there. Surprised but unperturbed, he made his way to the hospital's indoor lounges next. It was only when he found both those and the hallways devoid of her presence that he started to get worried. "Excuse me," he said, hurrying over to the receptionist in something of a mild panic. "I'm here to visit a friend. Can you tell me what room Astoria Greengrass is in?" The woman didn't bother looking up as she took out a clipboard disinterestedly. "Your name and relation to the patient." "Harry Potter," he said in a rush. "Like I said, I'm a friend of hers." The receptionist glanced up at that, but if the savior of the wizarding world meant anything to her, she didn't show it. A moment later, she was back to scanning a sheet of paper, tracing a pen across the page as she searched for Astoria's room number. "Room 412, on the 4th floor," she intoned flatly when the pen stopped moving. "You'll have to check in with security before you're admitted." Harry said a quick thanks to the woman before taking off down the hall and up the hospital stairs. Luckily, the security guards were much more excited to see the boy who won than the receptionist was, and they let him through without much fuss, one of the few advantages defeating Voldemort had brought to Harry's life. He reached her hallway and traced the doors with his eyes, looking out for Astoria's number as a creeping dread started to overtake him. 409410411412. When he finally found Astoria's room, a healer in scrubs was just closing the door behind him as he left. "Excuse me," Harry called, stopping the man before he could walk away. "Has something happened to Astoria?" The healer turned around at the sound of Harry's voice. When he registered who was speaking to him, he gave a small smile but didn't seem surprised. "Ah, Mr. Potter," he said calmly. "I was wondering when you'd show up." That gave Harry pause. "You were," the man nodded. "She talks about you, you know," he said, gesturing to the door. "For the past week nonstop to anyone who'll listen. We're almost tired of the bragging by now, but we figure she deserves something to brag about." "Oh," the man's words confused his emotions a bit. "And she's fine. She had an episode early this morning, but she's stable now. She's sleeping. You can go in if you'd like, but I'd ask you not to wake her until she does of her own accord." Harry glanced towards the door. "What kind of episode? She should still have a few weeks left, shouldn't she?" It weighed his heart down more than he was expecting to voice Astoria's deadline, but he needed to know the answer. "She could have a few weeks left," the healer replied, "but that's a hope, not a promise. The curse won't let anyone make it to 17, but it's taken its share of lives before then as well." "Oh," Harry stared silently at the door, and the man approached him slowly, stopping only a foot or so away. "Mr. Potter, it may not be my place to give you advice, but I'm going to give you some anyway. Astoria, and all of us at the hospital, can appreciate what you've been doing for her, but next month it'll be you that has to move on, not her." The healer gave Harry a supportive pat on the shoulder and a meaningful smile. "Just something to think about," he said as he walked away. Harry slowly opened the door to Astoria's room, closing it gently behind him as he entered. He was almost afraid of what he might find there, but the girl slept peacefully in her bed as if nothing was the matter. Apart from the tubes and rune wires connected to her arms, he'd have thought she was perfectly healthy. But she wasn't perfectly healthy, a fact he seemed in constant need of reminders to believe. He approached her bed slowly, taking care not to wake her as the doctor had warned him. Her golden blonde hair was splayed out carelessly on her pillow, and it struck him for the first time that the pale cast of her pretty face may have been caused by illness rather than natural complexion. For several minutes he just stood there, watching the rise and fall of her chest, wondering if her breaths would stop coming at any second. He'd naively held on to the belief that their next 3 weeks together were guaranteed, and that he'd be able to pack it up and keep going after her passing, but today had broken that illusion rather thoroughly for Harry. It was clear to him now that even after so short a time, losing Astoria would be no easier than anyone else he'd ever lost in his life. The position of the sun outside shifted, and Harry's attention was commandeered by a thin stream of light that filtered through the small window by her bed. He walked over to the window and peered out. It contained the same view as the one he enjoyed so much from the building's roof. Today he found he didn't like it very much at all, and he closed the curtains fully to allow Astoria the rest she needed. He left her room and the hospital a few minutes later. When Astoria woke up the next morning, her first thought was to regret the entire day she had missed with Harry while she was sick. Her next thought was something of a startled horror as she saw the very same Harry sitting on a chair in her hospital room. "Ah!" she yelled, sitting upright in bed. "What are you doing here?" Harry jumped up erratically, and she realized he had nodded off in the chair. "Astoria, you're awake," he said, rubbing his eyes. "I was just waiting for you." She raised an eyebrow at him but otherwise held her tongue. All things considered, she was rather flattered that Harry had been concerned enough to come visit her and even stay with her after a bad health incident. Incidentally, she had been hoping she wouldn't have another one of those in her life, but here she was. "How are you feeling?" he asked lamely. "Not bad, just a little weak. I should be back up tomorrow." "That's a relief." Harry sank back into his chair, clearly tired, and Astoria started to fidget uncomfortably. She pulled her bedsheets up over her body, hiding the ugly hospital pajamas she was wearing, and hoped Harry wasn't paying too much attention to her unwashed hair. She wasn't sure why she was suddenly so self-conscious, but she figured it had something to do with his unexpected presence in her hospital room and nothing else. You don't have to stay here, you know." He glanced up at her and gave her a warm smile. She felt a little flutter in her heart, and she pulled the sheets up to her chin. "I can leave if you want me to," he shrugged, "but I don't have much else to do otherwise. I'll confess I was a little lonely without you yesterday." Astoria sunk into the bed and covered her face with her pillow. This mushy version of Harry was in such stark contrast to his usual stony demeanor that she wasn't sure how to handle it. "You can stay then," she said, her voice muffled. "I can't have you dying of loneliness before we get through my bucket list." Harry laughed. "No chance of that. What's left on that list anyway?" Astoria pushed the pillow away, and Harry noticed her face was a little red. "There's still a lot," she said, staring at the ceiling as she tried to remember what else she had written. "I think some of them are a little unrealistic, though, so I'm not actually expecting to clear the whole list." Harry raised an eyebrow. "Unrealistic? Like what?" She hesitated a moment before replying. "Well, for example, I wanted to try going to school again, but I'm not exactly sure how that would work, so..." An exhale that sounded suspiciously like a laugh drew Astoria's attention over to a rather bemused-looking Harry. "When you said unrealistic, I was expecting something along the lines of going to the moon," he said. "Going to school, on the other hand, is something I can easily have arranged." Her eyes widened. "Really? For a day, sure," he shrugged. "You might be a bit behind the other students academically, but if you just want to know what it's like to be a student, Hogwarts would be happy to welcome you." "They would?" she asked. "Why?" "Well, let's just say they owe me big time. I'm sure they'd be happy to oblige any of my more reasonable requests, and it shouldn't be too much trouble to have you sit in on some seventh-year classes." "Oh, right," she said. "Sometimes I forget the guy with too much time on his hands is the same guy who defeated the most dangerous, dark wizard in history." Harry frowned. "Where's this sassy Astoria coming from? You entered a teenage girl's bedroom without permission and watched her sleep. For sure I get to take some jabs at you for that." "Well, when you put it like that." Harry recognized the playful tone in her voice and knew she wasn't actually mad at him, but her words still made him conscious of his position, and he knew he should probably leave before long. Before he did, though, he wanted to broach the question that had been on his mind for the better part of the past 2 days now. "Astoria?" "Yeah. Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Where are your parents?" She froze uncomfortably in her bed, and he almost regretted asking. She had never mentioned them before, but he knew they were alive after a quick dip into the wizarding family records a week earlier. He didn't want to force information out of her that she didn't want to give, but he felt like he should know what was going on with her family before they continued. "They're probably at home," she said eventually. "Astoria," he approached her bed, stopping at the edge. He felt the desire to take her hand in his, but decided against it. "You just had an episode and they haven't come to check up on you even once." "Yeah, well, when's the last time?" "The last time what?" she asked, knowing full well what he meant. "When's the last time they came to see you?" He wouldn't be pressing the issue if he thought she didn't care, but he could see on her face that she did. A young girl in her last month of life should have her family there to support her, but according to the orderlies, he'd been her only guest as of late. "Or Daphne," he persisted. "I went to school with her, I know." "Harry!" It was Astoria who grabbed his hand in the end, but the grip was urgent instead of friendly or comforting. "Please stop." His face cycled through a variety of complicated expressions, and Astoria remarked on how different this Harry was compared to the one that she had first met on the hospital rooftop last week. Eventually he sighed, and their hands dropped. I understand. An awkward silence descended over them, and Astoria started to feel guilty about her reticence. It's complicated, she said at last, throwing him a bone, and I'll tell you about it one of these days. But for now, I'd rather just keep doing what we've been doing. Is that okay? He nodded. Of course, I didn't want to pressure you. I just wanted to know and maybe help. She grabbed his hand again, but this time her grip was softer. I get it, Harry. But there's nothing you can do to help, and I'm not quite ready to talk about it yet. Okay. He squeezed her hand gently. I'll be here when you need me. She squeezed his hand back. I know. Wow, I almost forgot how beautiful this castle is, Astoria gushed. Thankfully, any vestiges of awkwardness from their conversation the previous day were blown away as Harry brought Astoria to Hogwarts. He had wasted no time in making the arrangements, both because the girl didn't have time to waste, and because he still felt rather bad about mentioning her family yesterday. It's definitely something to see, he agreed. They walked up the gravel path to the school, and Harry made sure to slow his pace to match Astoria's. He had initially wanted to bring her on the Hogwarts Express, but the logistics of booking the train for a last-minute trip for two weren't realistic. In any case, he still made sure to apparate them far enough from the school so Astoria could appreciate the majesty of approaching the towering castle on foot, and he was rewarded for his efforts by the awestruck expression on her face. You could probably spend all 7 years exploring this school and still not see everything, she exclaimed. Maybe it's a good thing I didn't attend. I would have gotten lost in some deserted corner of the castle, never to be seen again. Harry shrugged. It's easy to navigate once you get the hang of it, or if you happen to have a particular map. Astoria turned to look at him, hearing the untold story in his words. A map. He pulled a dilapidated piece of folded parchment out of his pocket and handed it to her. She unfurled it curiously, but it was blank. When my father was at Hogwarts, him and his friends made this, he said, pointing his wand at the paper and muttering, I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. It reveals everyone in the castle, all the time, almost wherever they are. Almost. There are a few places that don't show up on the map, the Chamber of Secrets and the Room of Requirement, for example. That's where you slew the basilisk and trained Dumbledore's army, right? He glanced over at her, surprised, and she blinked up at him. I read most of the articles they put out about you after the war, she admitted sheepishly. Harry sighed, and they kept walking up to the castle. Yeah, the basilisk was in my 2nd year, and the DA was in my 5th. Sometimes I forget how few secrets I have left. I'm sure you still have a couple, she smiled innocently. I'll get even those out of you eventually, though. After a quick reunion with Headmistress McGonagall that featured more tears from the woman than he'd expected, and a slightly longer reunion with Hagrid that featured exactly as many bone-crushing hugs as he'd expected, Harry and Astoria ate their breakfast in the Great Hall with the rest of the castle. They sat together just off the staff table, and the amount of stares and whispers that were directed their way from the student population made Harry a little uncomfortable. It's like we're celebrities, Astoria pronounced, clearly more comfortable with the attention than he was. I mean, I guess you are a celebrity, but now I feel like I'm someone important too, he shrugged. I know a decent amount of these people, so I'm sure they're wondering what I'm doing here, but they're probably excited to see a new face in you as well. Harry was still attending classes at Hogwarts 2.5 years ago, so he recognized a number of faces in the hall, but there were just as many that he didn't. Since the battle, many young magicals who were too afraid to attend Hogwarts under the threat of Voldemort had returned, and even more from out of the country were interested in an education from the school that had collectively defeated the Dark Lord's army. Even amongst the older years, Harry could only name one in every few students. So what's our first class going to be? Astoria asked, interestedly, finishing up the food on her plate. Now that I'm actually here, I'm starting to get a little nervous. I thought we'd start with herbology, he replied. It's one of the easier classes to pick up, so you shouldn't feel too behind. Ooh, I love plants. I think I can handle that. As it turned out, Astoria couldn't handle that, or anything else for that matter. She failed at even the most basic tasks in herbology, got overwhelmed by first-year spells in transfiguration, and accidentally swallowed her tea leaves in divination. And yet, in spite of her academic difficulties, she was enjoying herself greatly, and it was a rather inspired Astoria that joined 7th-year defense against the dark arts for her last class of the day. While we had a test planned for today, Professor Bill Weasley announced before the class began. I think that would be rather a waste given present company. The students cheered, and Astoria cheered along with them because she liked feeling like she was part of the group. Harry stood at the front of the class and gave them an awkward little bow. Hi everyone, he began. Professor Weasley asked me if I wouldn't mind giving a guest lecture today, and I obliged him. So I thought it might be interesting for us to cover some of the lesser-known spells a witch or wizard could use in combat. He noticed Astoria in a seat towards the front row, and the proud beam of a smile she was sending his way made him blush a little. Well, let's start with a tongue-sticking spell, the incantation for which is Langlock. This spell can be equally useful for preventing your opponent from calling for backup, or for disabling their ability to cast outright if they're reliant on verbal casting. As Harry finished with a history and explanation of the spell, he had the class split off into pairs and practice. Astoria knew she had no chance of performing the magic, so she just stood around for a while as Harry walked around the room giving pointers. Hey, Astoria, right? Astoria turned her head as one of the girls who had successfully cast the spell approached her. She didn't recognize her, nor was she expecting to. Yeah, that's me. I knew I remembered you, the girl exclaimed, snapping her fingers. We spoke briefly a long time ago. You were standing in front of me during the sorting ceremony, and I was there when you passed out. I always wondered what happened to you after that, but I'm glad to see that you're doing okay now. Astoria smiled, pleasantly surprised. Wow, I didn't think anyone here would actually remember me. It left an impression, she admitted. Terrified me, honestly. Astoria laughed. Yeah, well, my health goes through ups and downs. After that little understatement of the century, the two girls spoke for a while longer, and a few of the other students in the class joined their conversation. So you're just here for a day? One of them asked. Yep, Astoria replied. I usually study elsewhere, but Harry wanted to show me around Hogwarts for a day. That's a shame, the original girl, who Astoria now knew to be named Rebecca, said. It would have been nice to see you around here more often. What's your relation to Harry Potter, anyway? One of the boys asked. You said he wanted to show you around, but are you two a thing? All of the students in their circle perked up at that, and Astoria blushed red at the insinuation. She glanced over to where Harry was still working with the students who were struggling with the spell, and he smiled as he caught her eye. Her blush deepened, and she turned back to the group. Not really, she said. Not really, Rebecca repeated. That sounds slightly juicy. Astoria shook her head furiously. No juice. We're just, hanging out a lot lately. He's been showing me lots of things. There were a few snickers from the group, and she realized too late how poor her choice of words was. Her and Harry really hadn't been doing anything juicy, but she knew the more she protested, the more suspicious she would sound, so she just didn't say anything. Whatever you say, Astoria, Rebecca laughed. Harry glanced over at Astoria as they walked back to St. Mungo's. He had intentionally dragged his last lesson on a little long to give the girl an opportunity to talk to the other kids her age, but now he wasn't sure if that was cruel or not. She didn't have time left to go to school even if she wanted to, and giving her a taste of the good aspects of student life might have been inappropriate considering that. So, did you have fun today? He asked eventually. Was it what you expected? She nodded. Everyone was really nice, and I can see why so many people treasure their school years now. He raised an eyebrow at her wording. But not you, she shrugged. I think even if I was healthy, school would have been tough for me. Because of the material. The material, she agreed, but the social aspect too. It was definitely fun to talk to everyone today, but it was still a bit exhausting. I think I like socializing better when it's just the two of us. He couldn't quite read the expression on her face then. Her cheeks were tinged with red, but it could have just been a reflection of the setting sun. He smiled, putting a hand on top of her head and ruffling her hair. Yeah, me too. Astoria pushed the food around on her plate, silently wishing that she had written something else on her bucket list. While it was easy to say in retrospect, she felt as though she should have known that she wouldn't like sushi. She'd heard people talk about it like it was the greatest culinary gift the Western world had ever received from Asia. But as she stared at the slimy fish in front of her, she was getting flashbacks to the caviar from her and Harry's first outing. So what did you like to do when you were bored at the hospital? He asked. I know you said you read magazines and watched movies, but what else? Do you have any hobbies? Astoria knew Harry must have picked up on her unenthused reaction to the food. because he was clearly trying to overcompensate for her disappointment by maintaining an uncharacteristically lively conversation. Well, I drew a lot, she replied, humoring him. I painted when I could find paint, but otherwise I just filled notebooks with pencil doodles. He raised his eyebrows in surprise, and Astoria couldn't tell if he was faking his interest or if it was genuine. I'd love to see them sometime, he said. I have no talent for art myself. She shrugged, feeling a little shy. I'm not that good, it's kind of embarrassing, really. Hey, don't say that, I'm sure you're great. Yikes, she shivered. You sound like a coddling parent. And what's wrong with that? He asked. Sometimes that's how I feel. She narrowed her eyes at him. You're only 2 years older than me, Harry. 2 and a bit. She scowled. For some reason, she didn't like it when he brought up the difference in their ages, nor when he treated her like a child. As far as the wizarding world was concerned, they were both practically adults. She didn't mind when he ruffled her hair or touched her shoulder, but those fatherly smiles just made her confusingly angry. Is that what the rest of your notebook is filled with? Harry asked, not picking up on her irritation. What? The one you wrote your bucket list in, he said, gesturing vaguely at her person. You always open it to the first page to cross the lines off. And I've always wondered what's in the rest of it. Oh, yeah, for the most part. I also tried journaling at some point, but I found it wasn't for me. Harry took another bite of his food. Like Astoria, he wasn't totally taken with sushi, but a year of eating scavenged forageables while hunting horcruxes had made him a rather unfussy eater. Same here, he said, putting his plate aside. I think I lasted all of 2 entries before I found it entirely too vulnerable and gave up. But still, art might be a form of journaling in its own right. He gave her a suggestive look, and she shook her head sulkily. I still won't show you my drawings, even if I ask nicely. No. Astoria went back to silently picking at the bits of rice and cucumber she could extract from her slimy fish rolls while Harry finished his tea. As hopeless as he was, even Harry could still tell the mood of their conversation had turned somewhat for the worse at some point, but he didn't know where or why. A couple minutes later, Astoria pushed her plate to the side and turned to look at Harry. You know, some of the students yesterday thought we were dadding. Harry almost spat out his tea. What? Oh, I'm sorry, Astoria, I didn't even think of that. I should have made an announcement before class start. It didn't bother me, she interrupted. Oh, reading his expression for the cluelessness that it was, Astoria continued. I'm just saying that 2 years isn't as much as you think it is. We're peers. You might fancy yourself my surrogate uncle or father, but no one else sees it that way. Comprehension dawned on Harry, and he finally figured out what had bothered the girl. Oh no, the coddling parent thing was just a joke, he said, realizing it was a tasteless one on several different levels. That's not actually how I feel, like you said, we're peers. I'm sorry that I made it sound like we weren't. Astoria shook her head. Now she was feeling guilty. She knew he had been joking, but something about Harry seeing her as a child, even in jest, bothered her immensely. No, I'm sorry too, she sighed. It's not a big deal. It's just because you're always bringing me around and helping me out so much, sometimes I feel insecure about it. Like you're my babysitter instead of my friend, and I'm just the little girl you're in charge of watching. It's not like that at all, Harry insisted. We are friends, and I know you're not a little girl. She fidgeted uncomfortably, regretting the direction their conversation had gone. I know, I'm sorry, well, actually, you're a bit on the small side, he corrected himself, speaking over her, and eating a few grains of rice for lunch definitely isn't helping. Want to go get donuts? I could certainly stand to wash the taste of sushi out of my mouth. Astoria looked up at him in shock. He seemed to be bracing himself for the worst, but a tiny quirk at the corners of his mouth betrayed his amusement. Well, he asked. The immediate dissolution of the awkward atmosphere was too much for her to handle, and she burst out laughing, drawing strange looks from the other patrons of the restaurant. Yes, please, she said, standing up from the table and taking his hand. She was glad for the change of topic. She didn't have enough time left with Harry to spend it uncomfortably. For the love of God, from now on let's allow raw fish to do what they were meant to do, swim around in the water. I thought you hated scary things. I do hate scary things, that's why I have to do this. If you say so. Harry and Astoria sat in the movie theater eating popcorn, waiting for their picture to start. It was a horror movie touted as the scariest film in a decade, and Astoria wanted to watch it in an attempt to overcome her fears. Harry turned to look at her. So of the hundreds of movies you've watched in the hospital, none of them have ever been horror. She shook her head. I always watch them alone, and I knew there was no way I'd be able to watch my first horror movie by myself. And are you sure it was a good idea to start with this one? Harry asked skeptically. It's supposed to be super scary, Astoria gulped. Go big or go home, I guess. They quieted down as the lights in the theater dimmed and the movie began to play. It started off innocently enough, telling the story of a young boy who received a battery-powered doll as a gift from his parents for his 7th birthday. As the movie went on, however, the doll started to say things that weren't in its pre-programmed bank of lines, and it moved by itself when the family wasn't looking. Eep! Astoria let out a tiny exclamation of surprise as the characters opened up the doll's back only to discover that it was missing batteries, confirming the suggestion that it was acting on its own from the very start. Harry glanced over and saw that Astoria was pushed as far back into her chair as was humanly possible. She was already terrified, and the movie had hardly gotten scary yet. He placed his arm on the armrest between their seats with his palm facing up in case she needed it, and hardly a second later she accepted his invitation and grabbed his hand. As the doll started to get increasingly malicious with its activities, Harry's hand was gradually pulled off the armrest and into Astoria's frightened embrace. By the time the doll was finished killing its first victim, she was desperately hugging his entire arm with both of hers. It left Harry in a fairly uncomfortable position, leaning halfway into her seat as she clung to him in abject terror, but he wasn't about to push her away. For his part, Harry didn't find the movie scary at all. The entire plot of a killer doll was so ludicrous that it was more comedic than horrific, and the suspense scenes failed to garner much of a reaction from someone who'd had countless brushes with death of his own. Boom. The theater shook as the doll found a way to blow up a house, and Harry's arm was almost jerked out of its socket as the girl that clung to it jumped in surprise at the noise. Glancing again beside him, he realized that Astoria's eyes were tightly shut. Apparently she had decided that the movie would be more tolerable if she couldn't see what was happening, but she still startled at sudden noises and cringed away when the doll spoke in its creepy, melodic voice. He really wasn't sure if this constituted watching a horror movie or not, but so long as she was happy enough to cross the line off her bucket list, he wouldn't complain. Well, that really wasn't so scary, Astoria trembled as they walked out of the theater. She was still holding Harry's hand, but he had thankfully regained possession over the rest of his arm since the movie's end. You might have found it scarier if you opened your eyes, he provided. Hey, they were open for most of it. I just needed to rest halfway through the movie because of how boring it was. Harry lifted his arm and rolled up his sleeve, displaying 2 red hand marks where Astoria had gripped him in fear. Are these the impressions a sleepy girl makes? He asked. She blushed, swinging his arm back down where their hands connected. Whatever, she mumbled. I'm not afraid of a stupid doll. Her display might have been more convincing if her voice didn't break a bit when she said doll, but Harry smiled nevertheless and gave her hand a comforting little squeeze. I'm proud of you, he said. It's not easy to face your fears, and despite everything I think you performed valiantly. I'm telling you I wasn't even scared. Astoria, it's time to play. Eek! Astoria shrieked as Harry did his best impression of the doll's creepy voice, which honestly came out better than he was expecting. She shot him a withering glance once she was sure her knees wouldn't give out, and awkwardly slapped his chest with the hand that wasn't holding his. Harry, that's not funny, she whined. I thought you weren't scared. I wasn't scared. You just surprised me, AAH. Harry tickled her side where she wasn't watching, and her entire body jerked in panic from the unknown touch. This time her knees did give out, and it took Harry to support her weight and keep her from falling. Harry, you're being mean. She squeaked halfway to the ground. I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight. Her big blue eyes were getting watery as she stared up at him, and he decided to stop teasing her before she really cried. He pulled her back up to her feet and held her hand tightly. Okay, I'm done now, he promised. But it's hard to resist when you're putting up such an obvious facade. She slapped him again. It's only hard to resist because you're a jerk. He laughed and pulled her in a little closer to him. Whatever indignant anger she was trying to direct his way fell to the wayside, and she wormed her way deeper into his side. You know, you're clinging to me awfully tight for someone who isn't afraid. I'm not afraid. She sulked, sniffling a bit. Then should we go watch that one next? He asked, pointing to a poster that displayed yet another horror title with blood-red font. She shook her head. We're done with horror movies, they're stupid. He peeked over at her. Astoria, it's time to PL. No, she cried, covering his mouth with her hand. Stop, Bad Harry. Astoria yawned and rubbed tired red eyes as she settled into her seat at the Ballycastle Bats Quidditch Stadium. Didn't sleep well last night? Harry asked from beside her. She glared at him. You know I didn't sleep well last night. I spent the whole night awake looking out for killer dolls. Harry laughed. Well, possessed dolls aren't very common, and the security at St. Mungo's would easily be able to handle it even if one did show up. Wait, Astoria said, turning stiffly to look at him. What do you mean by not very common? Possessed dolls aren't real, are they? Harry blinked. In the world of magic, a lot of things were possible. No, he lied. I was just joking. Possessed dolls aren't real, they can't hurt you. She narrowed her eyes suspiciously, but otherwise dropped the subject as the Quidditch match started. Astoria had always wanted to attend a Quidditch game, and it was even one of the earlier goals she had written on her bucket list, but she had never expected to see it through due to the general cost associated with sporting events. Even with Harry's promise of financial backing, she had been quite hesitant to let him spend so much money on her, and had only been convinced when he revealed the fact that Ballycastle let him attend matches for free. Apparently, the team's owner was a big fan of his. So why did you never go pro? Astoria asked Harry curiously, her head twisting back and forth as she followed the flow of the game. Go pro in Quidditch. I was never interested. Really? There were rumors you were going to sign with the Chudley Cannons after the war. Harry shook his head. Those rumors were started by Chudley in an attempt to shift their reputation as a losing team. Of course, that little play backfired on them when I never joined a club, but we were never in talks to begin with. Huh, Astoria said, before giving a little cheer as one of the Ballycastle chasers scored. And why weren't you interested? You have a reputation as an amazing seeker, and I saw all your trophies when we were visiting Hogwarts. You must have liked Quidditch. I did, he replied. And maybe I still do, somewhere deep down, but it's not what it used to be. She turned to look at him. You fell out of love, he shrugged. I don't know, maybe. I tried playing a couple of pickup games after the war, but I couldn't push down the feeling that I was doing something silly. Like, we've just been through a devastating conflict, and here I am flying around trying to catch a metal ball for an arbitrary amount of points. She grimaced. You sure know how to suck the joy out of fun things. It's not how I felt when I was younger, but it is now. I guess that's part of growing up. That's kind of sad. Maybe it's good in a way that I'll never get to grow up. He glanced over at her, but the expression on her face was unreadable. On a whim, he put his hand on the armrest as he had done at the movie theater, and like before, she took it in hers. That was amazing, Astoria said excitedly as they moved to leave the stadium, any hint of her earlier tiredness completely gone. I'm glad that this was the game I got to see in person. Fortunately for both of them, the match had been a good one. The Holyhead Harpies had pulled ahead by over 100 points in the last stretch of the game, and each team had a clear win condition. Holyhead needed to run away with the lead before Ballycastle caught the snitch, and Ballycastle had to catch the snitch before they were too far behind to win. In a spectacular maneuver that got even Harry slightly excited, the Bat-Seeker caught the golden snitch just moments before another potential goal for the Harpies, leading to a Ballycastle victory. It was an entertaining one, Harry agreed. That catch will be on the front page of the Prophet tomorrow for sure. Unless someone got a picture of you, that is, Astoria joked. I'd like to believe my days of making every headline are safely behind me. They continued on their way out of the stadium, interspersing light conversation with stretches of comfortable silence, a routine that had become the pair's default over the past couple weeks. It was during a particularly long one of these silences that Harry noticed Astoria had stopped following him. Astoria? He asked, turning around to look questioningly at the girl who was frozen in place behind him. What's up? She was staring into the crowd like she had seen a ghost, and he could practically feel the breath that was caught in her throat. He called out to her again, but she stayed there unmoving, seemingly oblivious to his voice. He was starting to get nervous that it was her curse acting up, and was about to apparate her back to the hospital, but then he followed her gaze and saw the source of her distress. Daphne Greengrass stood there across from them, in shouting distance, wearing a shocked expression not dissimilar to her younger sister's. Daphne, Harry said, surprised. Before he could call out to her in earnest, the older Greengrass girl blinked a few times, gathered herself, and turned on her heel. Harry watched in mild shock as her back disappeared into the crowd as she hurried out of the stadium. From beside him, Astoria let out the breath she was holding. "Figures," she muttered. Harry turned a puzzled look back at her. Astoria." He didn't want to press the girl for an explanation, as he knew she wasn't comfortable talking about her family, but now he was really confused. At the sound of his voice, Astoria finally turned to look at him as if surprised he was there. Another one of the expressions he couldn't read flashed across her face, but a moment later she sighed. "All right, fine," she said. "Huh. I guess I have to tell you now, don't I?" Harry didn't have to ask for clarification to know what she was talking about. "Not if you don't want to," he said gently. Astoria shook her head. "No, I should." She had been rather hoping she'd kick the bucket before she had to explain her family situation to Harry, but apparently the universe decided she'd die too early to grow old with him but live just long enough for this. "So, tomorrow," Astoria said. "For today, let's just head back and pretend that didn't happen, okay?" Harry nodded. "Okay, Astoria." "So did we have to do this at the aquarium?" Harry asked. "Yes," Astoria nodded. "I don't want to waste a whole day talking about my family, so we're at least going to clear another line on my bucket list while we're at it." "I guess that's reasonable." Ultimately, Harry was just glad that she was opening up to him about her situation and possibly allowing him to help. So while the setting was a bit asynchronous for what would presumably be a heavy conversation, he didn't mind terribly. "Having said that," Astoria mused, "now that I'm here, I kind of just want to look at the fishies." She tapped the glass a few times until one of the aquarium staff scolded her, gesturing to the "do not tap on glass" sign that was just beside her. She hung her head in shame and embarrassment and moved back beside Harry. "I don't know," he said. "Looking at the fish is making me feel weirdly guilty about the sushi we ate the other day." She turned to face him, her baby blue eyes widening in horror. "Oh, sorry," he said, wincing. "It was the first thing I thought of." Astoria shivered. Okay, well I guess the mood is sufficiently awkward to air dirty laundry now. Let's see, where should I start?" She hummed and got a far-off look, staring vacantly into the fish tanks, and Harry patiently waited for her to begin speaking. They wandered through the aquarium's rooms as she tried to sort her thoughts, and almost 15 minutes passed between them in complete silence. Harry was almost starting to wonder if she'd decided against talking when she finally spoke up again. "I was 5 when I was diagnosed with my curse," Astoria began, almost startling Harry with the sound of her voice. "Everyone in my family knew it was a possibility for either me or Daphne, but they naturally hoped it wouldn't happen and were pretty upset when they found out. We were playing in the backyard one day when I collapsed, and the healers at St. Mungo's confirmed what my parents were already beginning to suspect a few days later." Harry nodded. This, at least, he could have inferred. "The first few years were okay," she continued, glancing at the little crustaceans floating around in their habitat. "I didn't really understand the curse, and 17 sounded a long way away. My parents treated me well. But I think even then it was obvious they were keeping some space between us, like I was a distant relative instead of their daughter. Anyway, if I noticed a difference between the way they treated me and Daphne, I didn't care much, and I spent most of my time playing with her. We were practically inseparable until she started at Hogwarts." Harry stared at Astoria as she spoke. She was being clear and concise. He had a feeling she had already thought this story out, and only needed the last 15 minutes to strengthen her resolve to tell it to him. "Me and Daphne exchanged letters while she was at school, and she'd tell me about all of the things I had to look forward to when I started in a couple years. I was pretty lonely at home without her, and my parents were short with me, but I still believed that I'd be fine. I had no reason to think I wouldn't get to go to Hogwarts, and there would even be the occasional whisper about finding a cure for my curse. My family was very wealthy at the time, and I know they invested some of it into research for my condition." She sighed and kept walking, Harry following silently behind her as he listened to her story. "Anyway, things really started to go downhill around the time I turned 11. I was having bad health episodes more frequently, and the symptoms of the curse that used to affect me once every few months became once every few days instead. My parents hesitantly sent me off to Hogwarts anyway, mostly at Daphne's insistence, and she held my hand the whole way there. You already know what happened next, and that was the end of that." Harry frowned, confused but not wanting to interrupt. He knew the context was important for the whole story, but until this point her family still seemed within the realm of what was approximately reasonable. They walked for another few minutes in silence, until Astoria stopped in front of a large tank inhabited by stingrays. She watched them swim around, and smiled a bit as one of them turned over and showed off its rather goofy-looking face. "I think the first change I noticed was how they addressed me," she continued, softer. "I was a kid. Everyone called me Torre. But from then on, it was only Astoria. I spent a lot of sleepless nights thinking about that, but I never mentioned it out loud, probably because I was afraid of what they might say. Even Daphne, whose horrified face was the last thing I remembered before I passed out at the sorting ceremony, started drifting further away from me. Her letters were a bit less frequent, and over the summers she spent more time with her friends from school than with me. Again, I noticed, and it upset me a lot, but I didn't say anything. Harry wasn't sure if he was imagining it or not, but he thought Astoria's face might have fallen a bit since she began. He reached a tentative hand towards hers, brushing her palms with his fingers, and she grabbed it unconsciously. "A couple of years ago, when my symptoms started to get really out of control, it was decided that I should start staying at St. Mungo's overnight. My parents alternated visiting me every week, and even though I knew they didn't love me anymore, it still felt nice to get their attention. Daphne showed up occasionally, but she never stayed long and she always seemed distracted. Eventually, I realized that I had lost my only friend somewhere along the way as well." Harry felt his heart break a bit, and he squeezed her hand. "Thanks, Harry," she said, smiling up at him. "Anyway, about 6 months ago, I got into a fight with my mom, and I haven't seen any of them since. Well, until yesterday, I guess." "What?" It was his first interjection since the girl started her story, but Harry couldn't stop the word from coming unbidden from his mouth. On top of everything else Astoria had gone through, her family had abandoned her over a single argument from half a year ago. "Yeah," she laughed humorlessly. "And to make it even more ironic, we were fighting about you, actually." Now Harry was really floored. "Me?" he repeated incredulously. "How did that? Why, what?" she sighed. "It was one of the articles in the Daily Prophet when you first went radio silent. My mom started talking to me about it, but it turned out we had very different views on the matter. You see, my parents weren't technically Death Eaters, but they were as close as you could get without getting the dark mark. They supported Voldemort's ideals and always sent vast sums of money to his cause in exchange for a place in the new world he promised. I didn't like it, and I even tried to convince them to stop once, but they always ignored me. I know Daphne disapproved too, but she never said anything." "And the fight?" Harry asked. He already knew about the Greengrass's particular political orientation, but he never held it against either of the girls. "When you won the war, my family suddenly found their investment had returned rather badly, and a lot of their old partners wouldn't do business with them anymore. A majority of my family's wealth disappeared almost overnight, and my parents were in a bad way over it. All this to say my mom blamed you for all of that, and she was rather pleased when you disappeared. She was telling me how she hoped you were dead when I finally snapped back, and things devolved pretty quickly from there." Astoria went quiet then, and Harry had a feeling she finished telling most of what she wanted to say. He could think of a lot of things he wanted to say himself, and had even more on his mind, but he didn't think any of them were appropriate, so he kept his mouth shut. "Well, anyway, there's a bit more than that, but that's most of it," she said. "It's the reason why no one visits me, and why Daphne ran away from us at the Quidditch match yesterday." In a move that surprised him more than her, Harry stepped closer to Astoria and enveloped her in a gentle hug. It was a first for them, and Harry remarked curiously at how natural it felt. He hadn't touched anyone in a long time, nor wanted to, and yet something about hugging Astoria felt right. From the middle of his embrace, Astoria peeked up at him. "That bad, huh?" He shook his head. "No, I'm just sorry that you've never met anyone who deserves you." She smiled. "I wouldn't say anyone. I got a little blessing right towards the end." They disentangled themselves and tried to ignore the curious glances of the aquarium's other visitors. They still had a few habitats left to explore. "The blessing is all mine," Harry said. Something about Astoria's story from the previous day bothered Harry. It was clear to him that her parents hadn't abandoned her over an argument. They'd left her long before that. It was Daphne's part in it all that he didn't understand. By Astoria's account, the two had been friends since they were children, even throughout their parents' relative neglect of her. And while it made sense that they might drift apart as they got older, especially when Daphne spent the better part of the year away at Hogwarts, it didn't explain why Daphne ran away from her on sight, nor why she hadn't visited Astoria once in the past half year. And it was for that reason that Harry found himself standing on Daphne's doorstep that morning. "Pea Potter," she stuttered. Daphne glanced over Harry's shoulder as if expecting to find her sister, but returned her gaze to him as she realized he was alone. Her expression was a mixture of shock, apprehension, and a certain primal fear, like she was beholding the boogeyman. "Hey," he said. She startled at the sound of his voice, and for a moment Harry thought she was going to slam the door in his face. A second later, however, she seemed to recover her wits. "Hello, to what do I owe this pleasure?" The look on her face and the tone of her voice made it clear that despite her words, she considered his unexpected presence on her doorstep anything but a pleasure. "I wanted to ask you a few questions," Harry said. "Can I come in?" Daphne hesitated. "About Astoria." "Yeah, I can't. My parents will kill me if they find out I let you in our house. But your parents aren't home, so it's fine." She raised an inquisitorial eyebrow, but her defensive body language betrayed fear. "And how do you know that?" she asked. "Are you some kind of stalker?" He shook his head. "No, I'm just well connected. Now let me in, I have somewhere to be this afternoon." Taken aback and quite frightened by his forcefulness, but left with little alternative, Daphne gestured Harry into her home. With one last wary glance outside, she quickly closed the door shut behind him. Daphne poured Harry a cup of tea with shaking hands. "You may ask your questions quickly, but I really need you to leave before my parents get back. My dad comes home for lunch sometimes, and if they find you in our living room, they'll really—" "Why haven't you visited Astoria?" Harry asked. The teapot in Daphne's hand slipped, and the steaming liquid burned her finger. She yelped, spilled the tea on the table as she dropped the pot, and cursed before vanishing the whole mess with her wand. I haven't gotten the chance recently," she said. "I've been busy, don't lie to me." The force behind Harry's voice surprised both of them, and he felt a wash of guilt as she visibly flinched. Sometimes he forgot that he was still Harry Potter, the man who killed Lord Voldemort, and that his name carried a weight he didn't feel. "Do you hate Astoria?" Harry asked, more gently this time. He wanted information, but he wasn't trying to give the nervous girl in front of him a heart attack, which she seemed one particularly loud snap of his fingers away from. Daphne sighed. It was a shaky, weary sound. "No, I don't." "Then why haven't you visited her? She's dying, you know." "I know, Potter." Her voice was cold but deferential. "It's complicated, okay? It's a family matter, and it's none of your business." "It became my business when Astoria became my friend," he said. "I just want to know the truth. If you don't hate her, why don't you ever visit her? And why did you run away from us the other day?" "Friend," Daphne scoffed. "Is that what you're calling it when you whisk my sick little sister off to Quidditch games and heaven knows what else?" "Yes, it is," he replied flatly. "Now answer my question, please." Daphne sighed again, and she sank into the couch with a tiredness that didn't suit a young woman her age. It was then that Harry noticed the bags around her eyes and the sunken pallor of her face. "I don't hate her, but I don't like her either," she said. "Astoria never grew up. She lives in her own delusions of a perfect, happy world and still thinks of herself as a woebegone princess in a storybook. She babbles on without a care in the universe, constantly demanding from everyone around her without providing anything in return." Harry stared at Daphne in shock. "How can you say that?" "She doesn't have anything to provide, and I know her, if she did, she'd give it away in an instant." "What do you want from me, Harry?" Daphne demanded exasperatedly. "Do you want me to pretend I don't find her incessant positivity unbearably annoying? Do you want me to ignore everything my family is going through so I can spend time with a little girl who's already dead?" "She's not already dead," Harry said, trying to keep his voice steady. "She's very much alive, and she misses you." "All of you?" Daphne shook her head. "Listen, Harry, I know what you're trying to do, but it's not going to work. Even if I wanted to visit her, which I don't, my parents wouldn't stand for it. They really do hate her, and they'd take it as a betrayal if they knew I spoke to her." "Why?" Harry asked, still at a loss. "How could they hate their own daughter?" Daphne took a deep breath, looking around nervously as if expecting her parents to show up at any moment. "They think she's the reason our family collapsed," she admitted. "I know it's stupid, but it's what they think, or pretend to think anyway." "I don't get it. What does Astoria have to do with any of that?" Daphne chewed at her lip and glanced around again. "They were encouraged to shell out a ton of money to curse breakers when she was a child, and even today, despite all our other debts, they still pay for her room at St. Mungo's. They gave up on her a long time ago, but they knew dropping her support would be the last straw needed to destroy our family's reputation for good. And despite everything we did for her, she still has the audacity to cast moral judgments on us." She shook her head. But of course she does, because none of this ever has or ever will affect her. Harry narrowed his eyes. And that's enough for them to hate her. No, there's still a lot you don't know, Daphne said, but it doesn't matter now. Suffice to say, our hands are already full dealing with financial ruin, and I'm not willing to risk another rift in the family for the sake of a girl with 2 weeks left on this planet. The callous way Daphne spoke about her sister threatened to ignite some faraway feelings of anger within Harry, but he easily pushed them down. Long gone were the days where he struggled with containing his emotions. Lately, he couldn't find them even when he wanted to. But you don't hate her, he said at last. Daphne sighed. If that's all you got from this whole conversation, then please visit her, let her know. Were you listening to anything I said? Daphne asked frustratedly. Actually, you know what, it doesn't matter. You really need to leave now. You promised. I'll fix everything. Daphne blinked, looking at Harry like he'd lost his mind. What? I'll talk to your family's old business contacts, he said. Like I said, I'm well connected. I won't extend the offer to your parents, but I'll put in a good word for you, tell them we were friends, and that you're a reliable future head for the Greengrasses. If it comes from me, it should go a long way in redeeming your family's reputation. She stared at him in shock. Now she was sure he'd lost his mind. Why would you do that? She asked suspiciously. Because I want Astoria to know that the only friend she's ever had doesn't hate her. Daphne's face flickered through a dozen expressions in as many seconds, but eventually she nodded. All right, Potter, fine, you have a deal. I'll do what you asked if you hold up your end of the bargain. I will, he promised. You have my word. There was the pop of apparition from outside the Greengrass family home, and Daphne turned around in a panic. Harry moved to make his exit when the girl turned back around and stopped him. Wait, Harry, she said. One last thing I need to know. Why are you willing to go this far for Astoria? He waited a few seconds before replying, making Daphne sweat as the front door's knob started to turn. Because no one else will, I guess, he said eventually. The slimmest of moments before the front door opened to reveal Daphne's father, Harry disapparated from their living room without the barest hint of sound. I brought you some pastries. Thanks. Harry sat down next to Astoria on the St. Mungo's rooftop, filling the space that Daphne had recently vacated. The girl had wasted no time in coming to see Astoria. Apparently, she was as eager for Harry's help as he was for hers. So how'd it go? Astoria shrugged. It was fine, I guess. She opened up the little box Harry brought, fishing around and taking out a cinnamon roll. She took a tiny bite and passed the box back to him. Just fine, he asked, setting the box on the bench between them. It was a bit anticlimactic, she admitted. There were no tears and no fighting, just a couple of apologies and a warning that she wouldn't be able to meet me again. Harry hadn't asked Daphne to lie, so he couldn't fault her for her honesty. If anything, it was probably what Astoria needed. That wouldn't make Astoria feel any better, though, so he grabbed her hand, the one that wasn't holding on to a cinnamon roll. We can talk about it if you'd like, he offered. She shook her head. I think it's over now. I don't want to spend any more time on this, and I at least got an ending, even if it wasn't a satisfying one. Okay. They sat in silence for a while, Astoria taking tiny bites out of her roll while Harry picked at a tart. He still wasn't sure if his decision had been right or not, but that feeling was no stranger to him. He had the decency to ask Astoria if she wanted to meet with Daphne before she actually came, but it was still rather more meddlesome than he preferred to be. I spoke to the healers while you were talking with Daphne, he said eventually. They said your numbers have been looking good the past few days, and that they'd be willing to clear you for a night. Clear me for a night. She asked, putting her cinnamon roll down and turning to look at him. What for? Well, I thought we could go on a trip. Astoria raised her eyebrows in surprise. She was glad she put her cinnamon roll down because she might have dropped it otherwise. A trip, she repeated. Like a vacation, Harry nodded. That's the idea. It's on your bucket list anyway, isn't it? Astoria gave him a suspicious look. Yeah, it is, but how do you know that? He laughed. You're a teenage girl, of course traveling is on your bucket list. It was probably the first thing you wrote. She glared at him. In fact, it was the first thing she wrote, but she wasn't about to tell him that. It's somewhere on the list, she said evasively. But that's a lot of effort you don't need to put in for me. I'd feel a bit guilty if I started to take up your nights as well as your days. It's no problem, he assured her. I was just thinking it would be nice to get out of Britain for a couple days anyway. Astoria knew Harry well enough by now to know that he probably wasn't actually thinking that, but he was giving her an excuse and she took it. All right then, if you're sure you don't mind, she said. I certainly won't refuse if you're willing to take me somewhere. I am. I can bring us back right away if anything goes wrong, but otherwise it should be a fun trip. He turned to look at her. Do you have anywhere in particular you wanted to go? Not really. I don't know the names of very many places to begin with, but anywhere would be fun as long as we're together. Harry smiled at her. Is that so? Well, maybe not anywhere, she corrected herself. I don't want to get kidnapped or stabbed or something. Somewhere rural and scenic might be nice, I guess. Rural and scenic sounds good, he agreed. I'll come up with something tonight, just be ready to leave tomorrow morning. Okay, Harry. They fell back into a comfortable silence as they finished their pastries, and Astoria shifted closer to Harry as the box between them was cleared away. She snuggled into his side, and after a moment he put an arm around her. Thanks, Harry. Astoria's voice was so quiet he almost didn't hear her. For what? He asked. She buried her face into his shoulder. Everything. Everything's so different, Astoria said, taking in their surroundings with wide eyes. This is nothing like Britain. We're halfway across the world, Harry replied. So I'd assume so. They continued their way through the village that Harry had chosen for their little trip, appreciating the scenery as they went. Beautiful fall foliage was on full display, and the jarring lack of English signage or conversation helped drive home the fact they were really somewhere else. All things considered, Harry thought he had done a stellar job of accommodating Astoria's destination parameters of rural and scenic. So what's there to do here? She asked Harry, smiling and waving at the locals they passed. Well, there are some trails, famous buildings, and temples we can check out during the day, and we have reservations at a restaurant in the evening. There's also a mountain near our hotel if you're up for a hike. Sounds great, I'm up for everything, Astoria said. Though maybe we can space out the walking. I'm not the most athletic person. They headed first to the hotel to drop off their bags, and after a quick break to wash up made their way to a tea room down the street. It wasn't the type of tea, nor the type of room they'd find in Britain, but they found it pleasant nonetheless and enjoyed the view from the window immensely. When they finished up, they continued on to explore the rest of the village. Harry, look. It both amused and impressed Harry in equal measure how easily Astoria seemed to make friends. Overcoming a rather high hurdle in terms of the language barrier, the girl used smiles, hand gestures, and dramatic body language to communicate with the locals. Her overwhelming amiability had earned her some complimentary cakes at the tea house and had led to her now posing for pictures on the street with some of her bolder admirers. I think they think I'm a celebrity. She called over to him, a big smile on her face. How anyone could dislike this girl is beyond me, he thought fondly, smiling back at her. Her family has no clue what they're missing. After saying bye to her new friends, Astoria ran back to Harry. Is there a famous person who looks like me or something? I'm happy to get my picture taken, but I hope they don't think I'm someone that I'm not. I think you're fine, Harry said. You're a pretty blonde girl with a lot of confidence. They probably just assume you're a model or actress from America. Astoria's eyebrows shot up and a hint of a blush touched her cheeks. You think I'm pretty? She asked. Harry cleared his throat. Well, yeah, I guess. Have I never said that before? She shook her head. Never. Oh, Harry developed a little blush of his own and Astoria peered curiously up at his face. Harry, are you embarrassed? No. Are you sure? She asked, grabbing onto his arm with a smirk. Do you have difficulty complimenting girls? No, he repeated, averting his gaze. Astoria laughed, a girlish sound that made Harry redden further. So you do have a cute side after all, she said, poking at his face. He swatted her finger away. Shut up. She giggled again, and Harry couldn't do anything to prevent the slight lift at the corner of his mouth. Blissfully, she stopped teasing him after that, and they walked through the village in silence for a few minutes. Despite its relatively low population, the village was rich with culture, and many of its old buildings were breathtaking in both their grandeur and architecture. It wasn't the kind of thing Harry was expecting to enjoy, but he found it surprisingly fun. And if he were being honest, experiencing it all with Astoria by his side added something important he couldn't explain. So, how pretty are we talking? She asked eventually, breaking the silence. Harry sighed. And you were doing so well too. Oh, come on, I know you love it when I annoy you, so how pretty, rate me out of 10. He glanced over at her. 0, she pouted. You called me pretty not 5 minutes ago, don't go pretending I'm a 0 now, give me an honest rating. I'm not going to rate you, Astoria, it's juvenile and vain. Okay, but like an 8, a 9? What did I just say, a 10? She exclaimed. Harry sighed. Sure. You're a 10. Astoria beamed radiantly, but then a moment later she frowned. Wait, were you just going with the flow there, or am I actually a 10? The more you talk about this, the more points you lose. Let's just keep looking at the nice buildings, okay? We can rate those instead. Ooh, that sounds fun. That one's a 10, she said, pointing at one of the temples in the distance. Just like me. After a fulfilling day that consisted mostly of walking and talking, Harry and Astoria sat down for dinner. The restaurant they had their reservation at was well known, and a bit fancier than Harry was expecting, and both of them felt a little underdressed when they arrived. That only contributed to their image of rich foreign tourists, though, and they quickly settled in as their servers treated them both professionally and respectfully. This is so much better than sushi, Astoria said, savoring the taste of grilled vegetables and a soup with seasonal ingredients. I feel like I'm eating autumn, Harry laughed. Yeah. It is kind of like that, isn't it? He couldn't remember the last time he actually enjoyed eating, but for the first time in what felt like years, he was really tasting his food. Once again, he knew present company was probably going a long way in that regard. Harry, are you sure this is okay? She asked tentatively after another few minutes of eating. I don't want to make things awkward, but this place must be really expensive, right? He shrugged. A bit, but I have plenty of money. Even after everything I gave away. And you're fine spending it on me. I'm spending it on us, he corrected her. And yes, I'm fine with it, it's what I want. Okay, she said. Thanks, then, I appreciate it. I know you do, you don't have to worry so much about telling me. We're having fun and you can ask for whatever you want without feeling guilty. Astoria paused. You said, whatever I want. Harry gave her a look. She seemed particularly devilish in that moment. Well, hold on a second. What exactly did you have in mind? She glanced over at the table next to them, where a couple was drinking some kind of alcohol after their meal. Harry followed her gaze and then turned back to look at her. Astoria, you're underage? Yeah, and I'm never going to be overage, am I? Harry had a 3-second long internal moral crisis before deciding the girl was right. All right, fine, he said, but you stop when I tell you to, okay? She blinked in surprise before smiling happily at him. Of course, Harry. Ugh, I never want to drink again, Astoria said, stumbling out of the restaurant. Harry raised an eyebrow at her. You only had 2 glasses, and that's something people say when they get hungover, not when they get drunk. She clicked her tongue and straightened up. Yeah, I know, I just wanted to try saying it. While Astoria's face was slightly flushed, and her words and movements were a touch languid, she was far from being drunk and they both knew it. Night had well and truly descended on them by the time they left the restaurant, and she held on to him more due to the darkness than her minute inebriation. So what now? Astoria asked. The night is still young. Not for us, it isn't, Harry replied. The healers told me to make sure you don't overexert yourself for too long, and we can still do more tomorrow morning before we leave. Besides, I have a feeling there isn't much of a nightlife here. Groaning in mock disappointment, Astoria followed Harry back to their hotel. It was a low building that looked more like a little castle than a commercial lodging, and their room was both spacious and comfortable. Moonlight filtered through the windows, and stars were visible in the distance beyond. It was a beautiful room, and would have been absolutely perfect under slightly different circumstances. So, Astoria said, looking at the one bed in the room. Well, I'll sleep on the chair, I guess. Harry had asked the hotel clerk to set them up with a second bed while they were out that afternoon, but apparently something had gotten lost in translation. Harry had to sleep in the same room as Astoria so that he could periodically monitor her condition, but there was absolutely no way they would be sharing a bed. UMWE can share, I don't mind. Absolutely not, Harry said. That chair looks pretty comfortable, so that's where I'll be. You take the bed. Okay. And with that, they both moved to their respective sleeping receptacles, turned off the lights, and tried futilely to fall asleep. As the clock ticked over to midnight, both Harry and Astoria were still awake. Harry, Astoria whispered, are you there? Yeah, I can't sleep. Do you want to talk? Sure, what do you want to talk about? There was a moment of silence. Do you have any fears? She asked. Harry heard the shuffling of bedsheets and glanced over at Astoria. She was sitting upright in bed, and the soft blue light from the moon was illuminating her face and giving her an ethereal glow. She was wearing her ugly, shapeless hospital pajamas, and Harry thought he'd never seen anyone look more beautiful. Of course, he replied eventually. Everybody has some, it's human nature. What are yours? Harry hummed softly. Finding nothing, I suppose. What do you mean? Continuing on the way I have been. Wandering around with no purpose, never finding anything to really care about. I guess that's what scares me the most." She looked across at him. "Is that what this is?" she asked, gesturing between them. "Wandering around with no purpose." Harry shook his head. "No, these past couple weeks I felt different, but well." He didn't need to finish his thought. Astoria knew what he meant. When she died, he'd have lost his purpose once more. "What about you?" he asked, eager to change the subject. "Do you have any fears, other than evil dolls, that is?" Another moment of silence, and Astoria spoke up again. "What would you do if I told you I was scared of dying?" Harry froze. Despite everything, he hadn't been expecting that. He caught Astoria's eye but couldn't read the expression on her face, and they both sat there motionless and silent for several minutes. Eventually, she patted the place next to her on the bed, and he hesitantly made his way over to it. He sat on the edge, but she shuffled towards him and grabbed his shoulder, pulling him down so that he was lying on his back beside her instead. When he was finally in position, she curled up against him, putting her head on his chest. Her question was still making circles around his mind when she spoke next. "I didn't used to be, you know." He glanced down at her. "Afraid of dying," she nodded, and he felt the movement as her cheek rubbed against shirt. "Do you remember when we first met, and I thought you were going to jump off the roof of St. Mungo's?" "Yeah, you told me I couldn't, and that there were protective wards to catch me." "There's a reason I knew that," she mumbled into him. Harry inhaled sharply, and Astoria peeked up at him as if to gauge his reaction. A moment later, he let out the breath he had been holding and put an arm around her. She gave him the tiniest of smiles and let her head fall back down. "It was a few days after the fight with my mom," she explained. "I had just had a particularly bad episode, and waiting around didn't seem worth it anymore. I decided that I'd had enough, and tried taking matters into my own hands." She paused for a moment, giving him a weak, self-deprecating laugh. "It didn't work, of course, and then suddenly I had to spend a lot more time with the nurses for counseling." Harry squeezed Astoria tighter. He tried to suppress the feelings in his chest as he realized her parents would have been contacted at that point, and yet still didn't come to see her. He didn't say anything. He didn't have the first clue what to say. "It was the nurses who suggested I write a bucket list," she continued. "Give me some motivation to keep going, and maybe some things to look forward to. I didn't end up making much progress until you came around, but it was still fun thinking up all the things I would have liked to do. They helped me a lot back then, and after a while I realized the only person I was hurting by being down all the time was myself. I started making an effort, and it worked. Even if I was bored a lot, I really started to enjoy life more." Reconciling Astoria's story with her upbeat personality should have been difficult for Harry, but he realized that it wasn't. Unlike him, she allowed herself to feel. He'd never considered anything of the sort himself, but he probably never cared enough to. Knowing who Astoria was as a person and knowing the barest details of what she'd been through, he would have been more surprised if she didn't have that kind of experience. "Anyway, I still wasn't afraid by the time we met," she said. "I was in a better place, but I had accepted the end nonetheless. But then all of this with you happened." "So it's my fault?" Harry asked softly. "All your fault," she agreed. "You showed me what it was like to live, and now I'm afraid of dying." Before he could wonder what sadistic streak of hers had decided to saddle him with that revelation, she kept speaking. "But you know what? I think it would have been a lot sadder if I wasn't." "You do?" "Yeah. When I think about the Astoria that wasn't on the rooftop that day, the one that didn't ask you to take her on a picnic, I feel pity, not envy. I'm really glad that I met you, and not a day goes by that I don't think I was blessed with more luck than I deserve for having you in my life." She hugged him. "So when I'm gone, I want you to remember that above all else." Neither of them spoke after that. Harry just lay there, processing, while Astoria clung to him. He wondered if Daphne knew this side of Astoria, the girl who was scared of dying but who still took the time to worry about him. If she would still call her a delusional princess from a storybook. Or if she knew how hard her sister had to work to be happy, and all the obstacles she had to overcome to get there, if she would still call her positivity unbearably annoying. He thought not. And while he may have inadvertently caused Astoria to fear death, it was her that had caused him to fear not living. He didn't want to go back to how he was before he met her, and that was a debt no amount of fancy dinners could repay. He glanced down at her, and the silky blonde hair that reflected starlight as it splayed out carelessly across his chest and the bed, and pulled her in a little closer. Eventually, the girl's breathing steadied, and he knew she had fallen asleep. The day after his trip with Astoria, Harry found himself alone in his apartment once more. They had stayed rather late into the afternoon on the second day, and Astoria had been quite tired by the time they finally returned to St. Mungo's. He'd met up with her to chat in the morning, but she didn't have enough energy to go out, and she still had some blood tests to do at the hospital. So, much to his disappointment, he had to entertain himself today. A moment later, the doorbell rang, and Harry cursed himself for tempting fate. "Hey, Neville," Harry said, opening the door to reveal his friend. "Hi there." The young man waltzed right past Harry and into his apartment, immediately getting comfortable in a chair in his living room. Harry turned around and raised an eyebrow at him. "Why don't you come in? Make yourself at home, please." Neville laughed, stretching out on the chair. "I'd be more polite if you weren't such a difficult man to pin down these days. You're never home when I ring anymore." Harry closed his door and slumped down into the couch across from Neville. "Yeah, well, I've been busy lately." Neville hummed. "So I've heard. You know, there's a peculiar rumor floating around." Harry narrowed his eyes. He had a feeling he knew where this was going, and he didn't like it. "I thought you of all people would know not to trust rumors, Neville." "Perhaps. I have it on rather good authority that you've been spending a lot of time with one Astoria Greengrass." Neville looked up at him, and Harry bristled at the expression on his face. "I thought you wanted me to connect with people," he said. "Isn't that what you said last time we spoke?" "I do, and I did," Neville insisted, raising his hands defensively. "I'm just concerned. I'm happy you're enjoying spending time with someone, but I have reservations about you willingly inviting more loss into your life." "I looked into her curse, Harry. It's incurable. I know. I looked into it too, Neville. But I'm not going to abandon the girl just because it'll hurt me when she dies." Neville sighed. "That's not what I'm suggesting. I just want to make sure you're ready and that you're not going to sink back into another funk when this is all over. You realize this is the first time you've had a real reaction to something I've said in almost a year. I heard what you did for Daphne, too. You're finally getting back into the swing of things, becoming human again, and it would be a shame if you lost everything that you've started to build the moment she's gone." Anything I've built was thanks to her in the first place, Harry thought. Choosing not to voice that particular addendum aloud, Harry instead fixed Neville with a look. He didn't have, and couldn't imagine, a friend more meddlesome than him. On the other hand, he also couldn't imagine a friend who'd still be willing to meddle for him other than Neville. Letting go of his anger, Harry sunk back into the couch. "I'm not in denial," he said eventually. "I know she's going to die, and I know no one wants to see me break over it. I can't make any promises, but I did tell her that I'd try my best. Is that good enough for you?" Neville nodded. "Of course, Harry. That's all I wanted to hear. And I'll be around too, okay? I'll leave my schedule open, so don't forget." "All right, Neville, thanks." Harry was expecting the conversation to end there, but his friend remained seated. "So, Neville began more tentatively than he had been previously. "Not that this is any of my business, but are you two No," Harry yelled, not letting Neville finish his sentence. "No, we're platonic. I think anything else would be inappropriate." Unbidden, memories of waking up in the hotel bed with Astoria adorably cuddled into his side sprung to mind. He blushed ever so slightly, and much to his horror, Neville noticed. "Oh, listen, Harry," he started, raising his hands. "I mean, it's okay if you are. I don't think it's wrong per SCIT might make things more difficult in the end, but really," Harry raised a hand. "Neville, please stop. I promise you we've done nothing." "Okay," he said, clearing his throat. "Well, that's fine. I'll, leave you to it now." Neville made a quick exit from his apartment, and Harry seriously wondered why the boy bothered broaching the subject at all if he was going to become so awkward about it. Sighing, Harry threw himself back onto the couch and lay down. Once it was conjured, that vision of Astoria tended to stick around for a while. They really hadn't done anything, and yet her sweet smell and the warmth of her body were still fresh in his memory. He felt a little guilty about that for some reason. "Ah, geez," Harry said. He had planned on going to sleep for the rest of the day, but he knew there was no chance of that now. Astoria had originally written, "Go to a zoo," on her bucket list, but had since decided that seeing animals in captivity would make her more sad than happy, and crossed it out. Harry wasn't a huge fan of zoos either, so as a variation on the same theme, he recommended they visit an old farm animal sanctuary instead. The sanctuary, he found, was run by a squib in his 70s who had to close the practice with no one around to succeed him, and spent his days caring for the aging animals he had left. He'd been happy to let them wander the premises for free, but had eventually lost the battle of wills when Harry insisted on paying him for his troubles. "Please, Harry, please, please, can I have him?" Astoria asked. "If I promise to take care of him, can we take him home with us?" Harry stared down at the girl and the geriatric sheepdog in her lap and tried not to laugh. They were both making the same eyes as they looked up at him. "My home isn't your home, so your promise is empty," he replied. "Besides, that dog isn't up for adoption, though admittedly he seems like he's grown quite attached to you. Doesn't he? Maybe I can convince the man to sell him to me, except I don't have any money." She batted her eyelashes cutely up at Harry, but he ignored her jocular attempts at acquiring funding and let the thought hang. The dog followed them around as they explored the sanctuary, greeting the pigs, sheep, and cattle that still resided there. It didn't have the exotic excitement that the rarer animals found in a zoo could provide, but there was a wholesome simplicity about it that appealed to Harry and Astoria immensely. They even got the chance to hand-feed a few of them, which, while Harry thought was rather gross, Astoria loved every minute of. After a while they came to a stop by the horses, and both stepped up onto the edge of the fence to get a better look. There were only a few of them, and they grazed placidly in an enclosure that looked far too big for their modest population. "That horse looks like it's seen a lot," Astoria said, pointing to an old Morgan. "It probably has," Harry replied. "It's older than I am." "Yeesh, what a geezer." Curious, the old horse slowly tottered over to them. There was a gentleness in its eyes that reassured their decision to not back away as it got closer, and Astoria giggled as it chuffed and blew hot air on her face. "Hi there," she said, reaching up to pat it on the side of its thick neck. "You're very gorgeous." The horse just stared back at her with those passive, cloudy brown eyes. Its movements were slow and deliberate, like every motion painted in some way. Astoria said, still patting it. "It looks sort of sad." Harry shrugged. "Maybe it misses its friends." "How do you mean?" "Well, it's an old horse. If it's been on the farm for a long time, it would have seen a lot of friends come and go. Maybe it's tired of all that." Astoria peeked over at him. "Is that so?" He shrugged again. Astoria continued patting the horse until it finally wandered away again. They stayed where they were on the fence even after it had gone. "Who do you miss the most?" she asked eventually, breaking the silence. Harry pursed his lips and stared into the enclosure. She'd been afraid that the question was too sensitive to ask, but he didn't seem upset. He didn't even seem particularly surprised, like he'd anticipated the question. "Some of the people I miss the most are still alive. They're just not with me anymore," he said at last. She frowned for a moment, but then her expression cleared and she nodded. "I know what you mean. But today I miss Hedwig more than anything." "Your owl," he nodded. "My owl." Astoria had seen Hedwig, in the papers anyway. She was noted as one of the lesser-known heroes in the war against Voldemort, and there was even a statue of her in one of the new museums. She had initially thought the whole thing was a rather strange attempt at pandering to Harry, but maybe it was nice for him to have his old friend immortalized in such a way. "She was smarter than any of the other animals I knew," he continued. "I saw her more as a peer than a glorified carrier pigeon. There were summers where she was the only pleasant company I had, and she was there for me during the rough patches at school, too. There was a simplicity to our relationship, an unconditional love that only an animal or a mother could provide, and in many of my weaker moments, that's the kind of bond I miss the most." Astoria let out a breath. "Have you ever considered getting another, or—" He shook his head. "I can't. Makes sense." She shimmied over to his spot on the fence and put her head on his shoulder. He passively remarked on the uptick of physical contact she was making with him recently, but did nothing to push her off. He didn't mind. When he was with her, no matter what they were doing, he felt deeply comfortable. It was weird to consider, when he remembered they'd known each other for hardly 3 weeks, but it was the truth. "And will you miss me when I'm gone?" Harry glanced over at Astoria, and then tilted his head down against hers. "I think you already know the answer to that question," he said. They both stood there, together in silence, and watched as the old Morgan shuffled into its stable and lay down to sleep. "I'm kind of scared." "So am I." Astoria turned to look at him, a startled expression on her face. "What?" she said, a little concerned. "Why?" Harry grinned. "I haven't ridden a broom in almost a year. You tell me that now?" Before either of them could say another word, Harry took off at top speed, accelerating them fast into the night sky. Originally, he hadn't had the heart to buy another broom after losing his firebolt, but he'd given in today. He didn't want to ride a borrowed broom with Astoria. Knowing she liked to go fast based on their experience at the amusement park, he purchased a racing model that hit higher speeds than the Quidditch-oriented brooms. The trade-off was a general decrease in maneuverability, but Harry hadn't been the youngest seeker in a century for no reason, and he got a grip on the broom's handling pretty quickly. "Eep!" Astoria let out a little shriek as he started flying loops, but the nervous sound became exhilarated before long. "Can it go faster?" she called over his shoulder. Harry's laugh was lost to the wind, and he picked up the pace, pushing the broom to its limits. He felt the familiar adrenaline rush as they ducked in and around the trees of a nearby forest, and the unfamiliar rush from the sensation of Astoria's arms wrapped tightly around him. He'd told her that he wouldn't let her fall no matter what, but she still clung to him like what was left of her life depended on it. "That was amazing," Astoria exclaimed when they finally started to slow down. "I totally understand why people love flying now," Harry nodded. "Just add a few hoops and a few balls and it's Quidditch." He brought the broom down and they cruised placidly over a field, low enough that their shoes grazed the tall grass. Astoria pushed herself closer against his back and placed her chin on his shoulder. "So, what did you think?" she asked, peeking up at him. "How was your first time flying after so long? Do you want to play Quidditch again now?" "Maybe," he replied, trying to ignore the feeling of her body against his. "Flying was more fun than I expected. I might have to look around and see if I can't get my hands on another firebolt." "Ha, I knew you were enjoying yourself. You know, I'm pretty sure there's a casual men's league somewhere you can join if you're interested. One of my room neighbors at the hospital used to talk about it." I'll think about it," Harry said, and to his surprise, he actually meant it. They continued to drift for a while longer, until Harry finally brought them back down and they dismounted. Astoria brushed herself off, did a little stretch, and then straightened back up. "So, is it my turn to fly now?" she asked, looking at the broom with a hungry gleam in her eye. Harry looked between the girl and the broom. Do you know how?" "No, but you made it look pretty easy, and I feel like I'm gonna be good at it." "All right, then." Unsure where Astoria's confidence was coming from, he set the broom down nonetheless to allow her to try her hand at flying. He figured in the worst-case scenario, he'd be able to summon her back down to earth with a quick spell. She stared down at the broom and then back to Harry. "Go ahead," he prompted encouragingly, gesturing to it. "I don't mind." She smiled, but it was one of the cute, clueless ones she wore when she was confused. "Do you need me to teach you how to call the broom?" He asked tentatively. She nodded. Sighing bemusedly, he recalled Madame Hooch's first flying class when he was a first year. "Step to the left side of your broom and raise your right hand over it," he recited. "When you're in position, simply say up and be ready to catch it." "Oh, is that it?" "Yep." She blushed, embarrassed at her lack of knowledge, and followed his directions. "Up," she said a little meekly. Harry shook his head as nothing happened. "You need to be more confident," he said. "The broom will know if you're unsure of yourself." She turned to look up at him, a frown on her face. "Who says I was unsure of myself? You flinched as you set up like you were expecting the broom to hit you in the face." She blushed again, and Harry knew he had hit the nail on the head. "Okay, fine, up," she said, a little more confidently this time. Still, nothing happened. "Now you're being impatient," Harry corrected. "Command the broom, but don't try to force it." "I'm not sure exactly how to explain it, but you want to draw the broom towards you instead of pulling it." Astoria let out a breath and refocused her mind. She looked down at the broom and directed all of her will to the task at hand. "Up," she said. This time, the broom did rise, and Astoria smiled as she saw it leave the ground. Unfortunately, a moment later, it hit the girl right in the face. "Ugh. I think I'll stick to being a passenger princess," Astoria said a while later, holding a bag of magically summoned ice to her red and slightly swollen nose. Harry shrugged. "Honestly, it was kind of impressive, and only on your third try, too. It took most of my first-year class a lot longer than that to call their brooms." "Really?" "Yeah, and even after that, things were far from smooth sailing. Neville lost control of his broom a few seconds after mounting it and ended up in the hospital wing." He laughed at the memory and smiled as he thought about the ones that came after it. "Neville Longbottom?" Astoria asked, surprised. "He couldn't fly a broom right away." Harry was almost surprised to hear his friend's name from her, but quickly remembered that Neville was pretty much just as famous and much more relevant nowadays than he was. "No, he couldn't," he said after a moment. "He couldn't do much of anything until his 5th year, to be honest. Between some wand issues and a lot of confidence issues, he was a late bloomer in a lot of ways. Of course, those days are long behind him now. Ahem, Astoria hummed thoughtfully. So does that mean maybe I wasn't totally hopeless after all? Maybe I could have actually been a decent witch one day if things were different. Most definitely, Harry agreed, stepping closer to the girl and taking her hand in his. There are as many paths to success as there are people in the world. You'd have surely found yours if you were treated with the patience you deserved. She squeezed his hand, and he couldn't tell if the wetness of her eyes was from his words or the hit to her nose from earlier. Thanks, Harry, she said with a smile. That means a lot coming from you. Don't mention it. Now, do you want to do a bit more flying before we turn in for the night? He jittered a bit as he looked down at the broom, and she raised an eyebrow. You know, she remarked, you seem rather eager to get back on the broom for someone who said flying was silly not so long ago. Something about outgrowing it, if I remember correctly. He dipped his head sheepishly. She was remembering mostly correctly. Well, maybe I've changed my mind a little bit, he admitted. Maybe there's a value in doing something silly simply because it's fun. Maybe that's what makes it not silly. Astoria's eyes widened comically and she blinked at him. Wow, Harry, just when I think you've run out of surprises, you go and say something like that. What's next? Are you going to develop a sense of humor, too? He narrowed his eyes at her. Are you mocking me? No, of course not, she replied innocently, trying but failing to hide her smirk. I'm proud of you, actually. I now have the teeniest, tiniest glimmer of hope that you aren't destined to be a grouchy old man for the rest of your life. Harry reached over and started mussing up her hair. She yelped and laughed, trying futilely to push his hands away. Hey, stop, she protested. I mean it, I'm really proud of you. Yeah, he said, not stopping nor showing any signs of it. Don't get ahead of yourself, Astoria. I'm not getting ahead of myself, she giggled. Maybe if we're lucky, you'll even find a new friend so you can double your current co-eek. Harry, stop. I'm ticklish there. Astoria blushed as Harry's eyes roamed up and down her body. Not bad, he said. Not bad at all. Put it in the cart. Okay, she said shyly, ducking back into the changing room. Going on a shopping spree was one of the more vain things on Astoria's bucket list, and she had been a bit embarrassed to reveal it. But as they were approaching the end of the month and her life, it was one of the only remaining items. She told Harry that just window shopping would have been fine, but he insisted on bringing her to the biggest Muggle shopping mall in the area and buying everything that caught their eye. And what about this one? She asked, pulling back the curtain to show off a distinctly summery outfit. It was Harry's turn to blush, and a mixture of bashfulness and satisfaction overtook her. She wouldn't have the guts to actually wear something that revealing in public, nor would she ever see another summer day in her life. But she was feeling particularly devilish when she picked it out and wanted to catch Harry off guard. While she was happy with their current relationship, she did sometimes wish that he saw her more as a woman, and based on the expression on his face, she might very well have succeeded. Yeah, maybe not, he said eventually. This one doesn't have enough protection against the elements. He turned away from her, but the drag of his eyes betrayed regret at the action. She smirked contentedly and closed the curtain once more. Are you really sure this is okay? Astoria asked hesitantly, watching Harry pay for all the clothes they had picked out. Of course, he said. It was on your list, and even if it wasn't, I'd have still been happy to get you some new clothes. But, I won't even get the chance to wear them all that much. I mean, it's kind of a waste to buy new things when I barely have a week left, isn't it? Harry turned to look at her then, speaking in the tone he always used when she said something insecure. Absolutely not. You deserve nice things, and that's all that matters. You like the new clothes, don't you? Yes, of course, she said. I haven't gotten any new clothes since I was little, so it makes me happy. But well, you know. He took her hand with the one that wasn't carrying their bags and gave her a smile. It wasn't one of the rare, happy Harry smiles she had come to love seeing, but one of the ones that was tinged with sadness. She recognized it as the one he often wore when they spoke of her eventual demise. If it made you happy, then it was worth it, he said. It's as simple as that. They continued walking through the mall, and Astoria tried to think of ways to repay him for all that he'd done and spent on her. She hoped showing him that outfit from earlier went at least a little ways in balancing the scales, but she knew that was probably a little presumptuous of her. Why don't we go there? She said eventually, pointing to another store in the distance. More clothes, Harry asked, squinting at the sign and the items on display in the window. Yeah, but let's shop for you this time. I'll help you pick out some things. But I don't really need more clothes. Astoria raised an eyebrow at him. And what if there ever comes a point in your life when you don't want to wear jeans and a sweatshirt every day? I don't only wear jeans and sweatshirts. Harry thought for a moment. Wait, do I? She sighed. Yes, Harry, you do. This is decent, I guess, Harry said, opening the curtain and stepping out of the changing room. Nope, Astoria replied, pushing him back in. Doesn't suit you at all. Try the next one. Harry grimaced and turned to look at the massive stack of shirts and trousers Astoria had selected for him. Do I really have to try all of these? He asked. Yes, we're looking for the best, and only the best will do. Now hurry up and try on the next shirt. We only have 2 hours left until the custom teddy bear shop closes, and you promised to get me one. Harry sighed and started removing his shirt, not bothering to close the curtain again. Astoria's eyes widened, and she looked around questioningly, but held her tongue as she noticed they were alone. Harry was a bit on the thin side, but he had a definition to his muscles that belied his years of adventuring, and he had a variety of interesting scars to match. His body was young and masculine, and Astoria found it difficult to draw her eyes away. If he noticed her starring, he didn't seem particularly bothered, and while Astoria was bothered in her own way, she certainly didn't mind. When Harry finished doing up the buttons on the next shirt, she was almost disappointed. Then she realized that she actually was disappointed and silently chided herself for being a creep. So how's this one? He asked, stretching his arms out and turning slowly from side to side. Does it pass the Astoria test? Yeah, she answered, blushing and staring at the ground. Really, you barely even looked at it. Trust me, I looked and it's fine. Harry narrowed his eyes. You just said only the best will do, but now we're okay with only fine. It's better than fine, she said, raising her head to look at him. It's probably the best. Her flushed face got another shade redder. Well, I don't have much to compare it to, but it's definitely the best. Now Harry was just confused. Were they even talking about the same thing? Astoria was trying to remain cool, calm, and collected like the mature, almost adult she knew she was. But she couldn't contain her smile as she hugged the strange little plushie she had built with Harry. It was one of those weird, nondescript, vaguely animalistic models that no one picked, and yet was still an option at the teddy bear workshop, and she only chose it because she felt bad there were so many of them left on the shelf. Incidentally, it was her favorite gift she'd ever received. Are you going to name him? Harry asked amusedly, looking down at the happy girl. I already did, she replied. Weren't you watching? I got him a name tag. Astoria held up the little stuffed animal by its head so its back was facing Harry, and he saw the little adoption tag that dangled there. He took one look at it and resisted the urge to slap himself on the forehead. Astoria, Harry started. What? She asked innocently. Why did you name that hideous thing Harry? Hey. She pulled Harry away from Harry and back into her arms. Don't call Harry hideous. He's just a baby. You have to admit baby Harry is kind of ugly. Even the woman at the shop was looking at us sort of weird because of him. No, she was looking at us sort of weird because she thought we were too old to be building stuffies. Ah, Harry figured she had a point there. Anyway, Astoria said, pushing the shopping mall's exit door with her back so she could keep her arms around her new friend. I think you're never too old for stuffies, and I also think Harry is cute. I'm going to sleep with him every night from now on. Harry almost choked as the evening air hit him, and a moment later Astoria realized what she said and blushed. Is that so? He asked, trying and failing to hide his mirth. She hung her head, but Harry could still see her embarrassment from the redness at the tips of her ears. That's not what I meant, she mumbled. Well, you should have thought of that before you named him Harry. I really should have. Harry? Yeah, she paused. Have you ever been in love before? Harry turned to look at Astoria then, but it was too dark to see the expression on her face. They had just finished their evening ballroom dancing class, and one of the last items left on her bucket list. The experience had dredged up a few painfully awkward memories for Harry, remembering the Yule Ball in his 4th year, but tonight had been much more pleasant than that one had been. He wondered if dancing had gotten the girl in a romantic mood, or if she was simply curious based on his anecdotes from the aforementioned ball. I don't think so, he replied eventually. You don't think so? She asked curiously. How can you not know if you've been in love or not? He scrunched his nose and looked into the night sky. Because at the time I definitely thought it was love, but now I'm not so sure, she hummed. Sounds complicated. Maybe, but that's one of the reasons it's over now. I think the best things in life are simple, or at least not so complicated for so long. They walked in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts when Astoria spoke up again. Do you want to talk about it? She asked. Not really. It's behind me now and I don't think about it too much anymore. Astoria nodded. She already knew more of the details than she really ought to because the wizarding world didn't respect the privacy of their heroes very much, and she'd read all about Harry and his failed relationship last year in the gossip magazines. What about you? He said. Did any of the healers at St. Mungo's ever catch your eye? One, she admitted, a little guiltily. It was a while ago now, though. He raised his eyebrows. Oh, yeah. Yeah. There was a young nurse named Nate who did an internship at the hospital a few years ago, and I was convinced he was the love of my life. Even Daphne had a crush on him, and I knew I had to make my move before she did since she was way prettier than me. Harry made a face. He didn't know Astoria a few years ago, so he couldn't comment on the matter, but he thought the Astoria of today was more his type than Daphne was. Though he would admit to possible bias, as Daphne's beautiful exterior betrayed a personality that he couldn't find too many nice words for. When I was 12, and it was his last day at the hospital, I asked him to marry me, she continued. In hindsight, it was really embarrassing, and I even stole a flower out of the garden to give to him. Harry smiled a bit at the mental picture. And how did that turn out? I got rejected, she sighed, feigning disappointment. He patiently explained to me why he couldn't accept my feelings. Turns out, apart from the 10-year age gap, Nate was also gay. This time, Harry let out a proper laugh. Astoria turned to watch him and smiled at the sight and grabbed his hand as they continued walking. That happens sometimes, Harry said. Maybe more often than you'd think. Neville has a similar story, actually. Astoria raised her eyebrows inquiringly. Really? Yeah, but it's not my story to tell. When they got back to the hospital, Harry checked in with security and brought Astoria up to her room. He hadn't been doing that at the start of the month, but as they neared the end of the girl's life, he found he wanted to squeeze every last second out of their days together. She sat down on her bed and looked up at him. Thanks for today, Harry. I had a lot of fun again. He smiled. I did too, even if I'm going to have to cast healing charms on my feet for all the times you stepped on them. Astoria winced. I wasn't that bad, was I? Not as bad as I was, so we're clear. They spoke for a few minutes longer until Harry finally turned to leave, but Astoria stopped him before he could reach the door. Harry, she called. He turned back around. What's up? She was still sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the ground, and her hair covered her face to hide her expression. You don't have anyone you love now, do you? There was a meekness to her tone, and Harry wasn't sure what answer she was looking to hear. Eventually, he let out a breath. No, I don't, he said. Oh, okay. He couldn't tell if she sounded relieved or disappointed. Maybe a bit of both. She shifted on her bed then, bending down to take off her shoes and get ready to sleep. He looked at her for a few moments longer before turning around again. Good night, Astoria. See you tomorrow. Night, Harry. Harry woke up, and immediately an overwhelming feeling of dread and misery assaulted his senses. He felt chained to his bed, like no effort of will could ever convince him to leave, and he was sure in that moment that there was nothing left in the world to be happy about. It wasn't a particularly uncommon feeling for him to be faced with in the morning, but he'd been largely spared of it in the more recent weeks since meeting Astoria. He knew it was the distraction of her presence in his life that had abated the symptoms in the first place, and the thought of her imminent departure that had brought them back once more. I don't want this, he thought wretchedly as he rolled over in bed, not tired enough to sleep but not willing to face the day. I really don't want this anymore. Hours later, he finally managed to drag himself out of bed and get dressed to go meet up with Astoria. Are you sure this is enough? Harry asked skeptically. Forget about the list. We can do absolutely anything you want. Astoria sighed, but the sound was content, not exasperated. This is what I want, she replied. It's all that I want. The two were posted up by the side of a lake with a painting easel and paint brushes, each working on their own painting but sharing a mug of hot chocolate. The weather was just barely warm enough to make working outside tolerable, but cold enough that they needed to pass the mug back and forth frequently to stay comfortable. Harry had finished his painting some time ago. He wasn't much of an artist, and had gone for something relatively low effort. Astoria was still working, however, and the one time he tried circling over to watch her work, she furiously pushed him away before he could see anything. Honestly, I'd like to stay here forever, she said more quietly. Doing this with you. Harry took a breath. Forever's a long time. You'd get tired of me pretty fast. I don't think I would. People have said that and been wrong before. Well, I'm not people. I'm Astoria. Fair enough. They lapsed into silence then, and the only sound for the next several minutes came from Astoria's brushstrokes. Harry wondered if her words were true. Would she really not tire of him like most of the rest had? He would confess to feeling a similar way about her, but the implications of that hypothetical were irrelevant given her condition. "What do you think it's like?" she asked eventually, breaking him out of his reverie. "The afterlife, I mean. Do you think it might be like this?" Harry blinked in surprise at the sudden turn of conversation. "What made you think of that?" "Well, I was thinking about how I'm about to spend the next forever dead, and that I'm hoping it's something like this." Oh. Harry honestly wasn't sure what the afterlife was like, and didn't particularly want to discuss it, but decided to reply anyway as it might be a form of catharsis for the girl. In any case, he thought it was rather sweet in a morbid sort of way that she wanted to spend her afterlife painting by a lake with him. "I really don't know," he said, "but I've spoken to a few of them, and I don't think they found it unpleasant, or uncomfortable at least." "That's good to hear," she mumbled softly. "I just hope that wherever I go, I'm not by myself. I'm afraid of being alone again." Harry felt his heart ache for the girl. He'd have wanted to tell her that her loved ones would be waiting for her there, but knowing her past, he wasn't sure if she ever had any of those in the first place. "Can I come over now?" he asked instead. "Yes, please." He circled around to where Astoria's easel stood facing away from him and was about to wrap the girl in a comforting hug when the sight of her painting made him pause. "Astoria," she tracked his gaze to her canvas and blushed. "Ah, do you like it?" she asked. "You told me you doodled, and that I painted when I could find paint." He shook his head. That's wow," was all he could say. Astoria had painted the lake, same as Harry, but the similarities between their paintings ended there. In fact, after seeing hers, Harry wasn't sure if he felt comfortable calling his little picture a painting anymore. Every single one of her lines felt intentional and perfect, as if the tiniest alteration by another's hand would ruin it entirely. There was a feeling and an emotion behind it that took his breath away, and in a moment, he knew Astoria had tremendously downplayed her passion for art. It was a Muggle painting through and through, and yet he felt more magic on that canvas than on any of Hogwarts' moving portraits. "It's beautiful," he said finally. She blushed. "Really?" he nodded. "It's more than beautiful, I just don't have the words." Astoria smiled at him, and the simple happiness in her expression broke him. He couldn't help himself any longer, and he began to cry. Harry couldn't list every single event in his life that had culminated in him crying into a younger girl's arms, but he could probably list most of them. He was tired of the injustice, he was tired of the pain, and he was tired of the loss. He'd had to fight tooth and nail for everything he'd ever had since he was a baby, and he stood back up every time the world pushed him down. Over 19 years later, and it seemed the world was still pushing him down. Everyone always left him when he needed them most, and Astoria would be no exception. He was mad at her for dying, mad at himself for being powerless to do anything about it, and he was mad at the universe for taking away everything he ever loved. "SHHH," Astoria whispered, rubbing his back as he wept into her arms. "It's okay, Harry. It's going to be okay." He hated that this was happening now, in front of Astoria, but he also knew it couldn't have happened any other way. Anything else would have been too easy, and nothing was ever allowed to be easy for him. He hated himself for doing this to her when she already had enough on her plate, and he hated himself for being so selfish. Astoria's death would be a tragedy for everyone, for the healers and nurses at St. Mungo's that lost a patient, for the other patients that lost a friend, and it would probably even be a tragedy for Daphne, who would lose her only sister. More importantly, it would be a tragedy for Astoria herself, whose life and dreams were to be cut short by a stupid curse that she didn't do anything to deserve. And yet, Harry cried only for himself. "It's not fair," he said, squeezing Astoria like he could save her life by winning a tug-of-war with death. "I don't want you to leave me." "I know, Harry, I know." She continued to murmur soothing words as she held him, until eventually his shaking stopped and he got a hold of himself. He felt guilty as he pulled away from her, and his guilt redoubled when he saw the marks he had left on her arms from squeezing her so tightly. He had a feeling they would bruise, and yet the girl had said nothing about it. I'm sorry," he said at last, standing up and wiping his cheeks with his sweater sleeves. "I'm sorry for everything." She gave him a sad, affectionate smile. "So am I, Harry." Harry had been right about the bruising. Astoria tried to cover it by wearing long sleeves, but he could see the dark spots on her arms when her cuffs rolled up as she raised her hands. He felt guilty, but he couldn't do anything about it, especially for someone as magically medicated as Astoria. It was better to let the small things heal naturally. "So, where are we going to find a rare magical creature?" Astoria asked chirpily, ignoring Harry's downcast expression. "I thought we might try the Forbidden Forest," he replied. "Ah, cool, we'll be back around Hogwarts again." "Yep, except not in any official capacity this time." Since meeting that morning, neither had talked about the events of the previous day, and Harry was glad for it. Apart from the immense embarrassment he felt over his breakdown, he knew Astoria needed him to be strong now more than ever, and had silently pledged to keep his cool from here on out. In her final days, he wanted to be there for the girl, and not the other way around. As they apparated to and walked through the forest, Astoria took the opportunity to ask countless questions about the flora and fauna that surrounded them. "You sure know a lot about this place," she said, as he quickly answered her latest stream of inquiries. "Makes me feel like it wasn't so forbidden after all." "It was. I just didn't care much for following the rules when I was younger." Every year they'd remind us that the forest was dangerous and strictly off-limits, and every year I'd end up running for my life in here for some reason or another. Astoria gulped. "It's not dangerous now, is it?" "Not so much anymore," he said with a shake of his head. "The centaurs tend to keep the place organized, and a lot of the more dangerous creatures have been driven out since the war. I still wouldn't recommend coming here alone, but there shouldn't be anything in here I can't handle." Ooh, how reliable. They walked together for a little while longer until they came across an empty clearing, at which point Harry promptly set out a picnic blanket and took a seat. Astoria started, watching him pull a little basket with sandwiches out of a bag that couldn't possibly have fit it. "I thought we were going to look for a rare magical creature." "Some of the rarest things can't be found by looking," he replied, laying the food out on the blanket. "You need to let them find you instead." "Now do you want to eat lunch?" Shrugging, Astoria sat down next to him and began to eat. They sat much closer together than they had on their last picnic several weeks ago, and the conversation flowed smoother as well. Over the course of the next half hour, Astoria inched her way close enough to Harry that while she wasn't sitting on his lap, her back still lay across his chest in an intimate way. Fortunately, he didn't seem to mind. She had almost forgotten about their original reason for visiting the forest entirely when Harry spoke up again. "Ah, here we are. I was getting nervous for a moment there." Astoria turned her head away from where she was looking up at Harry and towards the direction he was facing. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw what stood there in the trees just beyond the clearing. "Is that a unicorn?" she whispered. "Yep, just wait for it to come to you, and don't make any sudden movements that might scare it." "How do you know it'll come to me?" "Just trust me." Sure enough, after a few minutes of hesitation, the unicorn slowly entered the clearing. Astoria watched in wonder as it approached her. "You can greet it by bowing if you'd like," Harry suggested, "but as long as you're respectful, it should be fine." She followed his instructions and gave the unicorn an awkward bow. "Hi," she said. "I saw some horses the other day, but you're much prettier than they were. Don't tell them I said that, though." The unicorn gave a snort, as if laughing, and Astoria wondered if the intent of her words had been communicated somehow. She hadn't been lying for the sake of flattery, either. The unicorn was the bright, glowing kind of white that was usually reserved for freshly fallen snow, and had long, silky hair that put her own to shame. The creature was large, and clearly very powerful, and yet it still radiated a majestic grace that belied its size. "Do you want to stay with us a while?" she asked the unmoving creature. To her surprise, the unicorn bowed back and proceeded to lie down on the grass next to their blanket. "Wow," Astoria mumbled reverently, daring to pet the unicorn's flank. "This is so cool." She turned back to look at Harry. "Did you know this would happen?" He shrugged. "There were no guarantees, but I had a feeling you'd be a hit with the unicorns. They tend to like people like you." "People like me?" she asked. "Unicorns are drawn to purity," he explained. "They're pure creatures themselves, and they avoid most everyone and everything else for the sake of self-preservation." "Oh," Astoria blushed. "Yeah, well, I guess it was sort of obvious. But yeah, Harry laughed as she trailed off, embarrassed. "It's not just a pure body," he said. "They care more about a pure mind and heart, a pure soul, if you will." I'm surprised they think my soul is still pure with that nasty curse on it." Give the unicorn some credit. "They know what darkness comes from you, and what was unwillingly given to you." They continued to sit there, Astoria patting the unicorn, both more silent than they had been before. "Some people drink their blood," Harry said after some time. "It has miraculous healing properties and can keep even the most imminent of deaths at bay. There are drawbacks, of course, but—" Astoria shivered. I'd rather die than do something that cruel. It was the answer Harry had been expecting. The unicorn wouldn't have approached her if she'd thought any differently. Probably for the best, he sighed. They say it changes you to drink it. Could have been worth a try, though. You don't actually believe that. I'm not as good as you think I am, then. It's not just me, she said, gesturing to the placid unicorn. Our friend is still here, right? Harry looked at the unicorn, who blinked lazily back at him. He felt like it was challenging him, daring him to make a move. There was a calm confidence in its bearing, as if it could read Harry's mind and knew he wouldn't hurt it. And for all Harry knew, the unicorn was reading his mind. Eventually, he let out a sigh. Yeah, you're probably right, both of you. The unicorn let out another snort, and this time Astoria laughed along with it. That's why we like you, Harry. What's on the agenda today? Harry asked Astoria as he walked into her hospital room. She looked up at him from where she sat on the side of her bed, and the sad smile on her face made Harry's heart immediately sink into his stomach. Astoria, he said, approaching her nervously. What's going on? I had another episode last night. They're saying it's a coin flip if I'll even make it to my birthday. He blinked, and his heart relocated to somewhere deep below the floor. Then what? What are we going to do? We're not going to do anything. It's over now, Harry. What? We finished my bucket list yesterday, she said. There's nothing left to do. I don't want you to be there when I die, and I'm not sure how pleasant I'll be to be around until then. I've decided we're calling it quits here, while the memories are still fun. Harry didn't want to believe what he was hearing. The hysterical part of his brain was telling him that this was some kind of joke, but her expression was set and determined. No, Astoria, I can't accept that, he said, shaking his head. We still have time, there's still more we can, Harry. She cut him off, and the sternness of her voice surprised both of them. It's enough, please. I want to be alone at the end, and it's better for you that way, too. I don't want to see you break over this, Harry. You still have a whole life ahead of you. Harry's heart was racing in panic. Was it something I said? He asked, worrying that his breakdown from the other day was influencing her decision in some way. I can be better, I promise. I'll be stronger. I can handle it, just please let me spend the last few days with Astoria. Rose from her bed and silenced him with a kiss. It was quick, chaste, and she had to stand on her toes to reach him, but it still left him stunned and incapable of speech. She smiled at him, even as her heart broke. Now my bucket list is really finished, she said. Thanks for being my first kiss, and sorry for not asking your permission. Harry moved to speak, but she raised her hand to stop him. And before you blame yourself again, my decision has nothing to do with what you've said or what you've done. These past few weeks with you were the best I've ever had, and I can't express in words the gratitude I feel towards you for spending them with me. But we have to end it now, while the decision to end it is still with us. So that's it. He asked, his murmured words barely audible. Astoria almost collapsed under the look of betrayal on Harry's face, but she managed to stay strong. That's it. Astoria watched as her door closed, shutting Harry out of her room and her life. Her heart was beating so fast and so hard that she thought she might die from stress before the curse had its chance with her. If she had expected to feel confident in her decision, she had expected wrong. This is for the best, she told herself, though the words felt empty and hollow in her head. I want Harry to remember me as the fun and vibrant Astoria, not the scared little girl who died begging the world for another chance. She felt tears form at the corners of her eyes, but she knew they had nothing to do with her impending death. The empty expression Harry wore when he left her room stuck in her mind, and she wished it wasn't the last one she saw. Even now, she wanted to run back out of her room and chase Harry down, asking him to stay by her side right until the end, but she knew that wouldn't be fair to him. He'd done so much for her, and she desperately wanted him to find happiness when she was gone. He was too good and too sensitive for this world, and this kind of ending was her best chance at letting him have the future he deserved. But that doesn't make it hurt any less, she thought as the tears started to fall in earnest. She pulled out her little notebook even as her body shook with barely stifled sobs and opened it to the first page. Among other things, she'd lied to Harry. Her bucket list wasn't even halfway done. She crossed out, "Have my first kiss," and the memory almost distracted her from the overwhelming sadness and anxious nausea. She touched her lips and could swear she still felt Harry's there. It was one of her many regrets that they couldn't have shared more of those, and she wondered if Harry would have obliged her if she'd been brave enough to ask earlier in the month. Her eyes trailed down the incomplete bucket list and stopped at the line at the very bottom. Fall in love with a shaky hand, She crossed it out as well. Astoria put the book away then and curled up on her bed to cry. I never even told him, she realized miserably. Harry had never felt so helpless in his life. For all the power he'd gained to defeat Voldemort, and all the knowledge he'd accrued by studying Dumbledore's old journals, he was still completely and utterly useless when it counted. What was the point? He thought numbly, sitting on his couch and staring lifelessly at the wall. What was the point of any of it? Astoria had never felt so lonely in her life. Even when her parents had stopped coming to visit her, her loneliness had been tempered by feelings of anger and sadness. Now she felt nothing but the loss of Harry and the crushing emptiness in her heart. The cruel irony of the situation was that her health had been fine these past few days. She hadn't been able to eat, but she figured that was more from the overwhelming anxiety than the curse. Her worry that she'd make poor company had been off the mark as well. Any fear she felt towards her own death had disappeared along with Harry. She was more afraid of facing another day without him than she was of dying. She didn't regret her decision, as it had always been for Harry's sake and not hers, but she found herself wishing to see him again nonetheless. There was a knock at her door, and her heart gave a traitorous, hopeful skip. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you holding up today?" She turned to face the voice and let out a breath. As she had expected, it was one of her nurses and not Harry who had shown up. "I'm okay," she lied. "Just a little tired." The nurse gave her an empathetic smile. "If you're feeling up for it, do you want to head to the rooftop for a bit?" She shook her head. The rooftop was her and Harry's place, and going there with another person would be a betrayal of their memories. "I'm just going to take a nap," she lied again. She hadn't been sleeping at all lately. "But thanks, Jessie." Astoria watched the nurse leave with the same numb disinterest she'd been treating everything with since Harry's departure. It was better that she didn't spend too much time around the nurses anyway, lest she capitulate and ask them to go find Harry for her. It had been a harrowing moment for her when she realized that she had no way of contacting him even if she wanted to. But it was thanks mostly to that instead of her willpower that she wasn't already begging him to come back to her. Astoria sunk back into her bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. Her brain wanted to die quietly and let Harry move on with his life, but her heart would give anything to see him again. "I really miss you, Harry," she whispered quietly to herself. Harry knew Astoria was still alive, because he checked the magical obituaries every 15 minutes and had yet to see her name. It was torture knowing she was out there when he couldn't go to see her, but he supposed that was the point. Astoria knew he'd break over her death and wanted to give him the chance to adapt to life without her before she died for real. What she didn't know was that it was already too late. Harry could feel in his gut that losing Astoria would be the last straw. As much as he wanted to go back to living something that resembled a life, and for whatever fleeting positivity he had felt earlier in the month, Harry now knew for certain that Astoria's death would shatter anything that was left of his heart. And then what will be left of me? Harry didn't know the answer to that question, and he didn't want to. For someone known as the boy who won, he felt as though his life had been nothing but a series of losses. He wasn't sure if he could take it anymore. "I'm tired of losing." He had hung up Astoria's painting on his wall, and every time he looked at it, he was filled with joy and sorrow in equal measure. He was so proud of her, and yet so disappointed in himself. Do I have the strength to stand up again? Harry didn't think he did, but he'd surprised himself before. What would it take? He stared at the delicate brushstrokes that comprised her lake, and remarked on how even Astoria's art radiated the same vivacity as her. He had come to adore the girl in every way, and it was a feeling he knew would never fade. Harry sighed. He'd resisted the thought for so long, but now, in the end, he was finally willing to admit it. "I'm in love with you, Astoria." On the final night of her life. Astoria Greengrass found herself back on the rooftop of St. Mungo's. She stared at the sky, elbows up on the fence in the same posture Harry often took when he was there. The view didn't do much for her anymore, but she felt closer to him this way, knowing that he was out there somewhere in the city below her. In the distance, she could see countless tiny lights representing countless tiny windows, and she wondered if one of them belonged to him. "Goodbye, Harry." A gust of wind blew past her, and she shivered. It had gotten too cold to stand around at night, but she'd taken to doing it anyway, as if it were her final act of rebellion against her own dying body. She didn't have many hours left at any rate, so the discomfort was only temporary. She was considering the merits of returning to her room for her final moments when a voice spoke from behind her. It was a familiar voice, and one she didn't need to turn around to recognize. "Bit chilly out here, isn't it? Why don't we head somewhere cozier?" Harry laughed as Astoria all but flung herself at him, wrapping him in a hug so tight he was surprised her thin arms were capable of it. Her teeth were chattering, and he cast some gentle, warming charms as he returned the embrace. "So I take it you're not mad that I came to see you?" he asked. She shook her head, but still didn't look up at him. She was taking deep, heaving breaths, and he couldn't tell if she was laughing or crying. "I am mad," she said, "but thank you, I needed this." After another moment, she raised her head, and the expression on her face made him melt. "I really needed this." He smiled and ruffled her hair as he held back emotion, and she preened at the familiar gesture. "Sorry it took me so long," he said. "I had some things to figure out." "It doesn't matter, I'm just glad you're here now. I missed you so much, Harry." "I did too." The first thing Astoria noticed when Harry apparated them back to his apartment was how much more inviting it looked compared to the last time she was there. She knew part of it may have been her change in perspective, but there were tangible elements she could identify as well. The usual drab lighting had been replaced with the soft glow of candles and small, warm lamps, and even the pillows on the couch were neatly arranged. "I like what you've done with the place," she said. He shrugged. "It's the little things that make a place a home." As she continued to look around, she noticed the painting on the wall of his living room and gave his hand a little squeeze. As selfish as it was, she was happy that he'd have something to remember her by after she was gone. "So, are you hungry?" he asked. She looked up at him and shook her head. "I can't keep anything down anyway." "Oh." It took the awkward look on Harry's face for her to finally glance over at the little table by his kitchen and see the plates that had been laid out there. Maybe I can try a bit, though," she added. They moved to the table, and Harry doled out a small bowl of pasta for her. It was immediately clear that he'd made it himself, because it was a little bit ugly, and even she noticed how unevenly the vegetables were cut. She wasn't very hungry despite her empty stomach, but the thought that he had tried his best to cook for her was so sweet that she found herself looking forward to the meal regardless. Sitting down, he prepared a bowl for himself as well, and they both began to eat. They were quiet for a while, but it was comfortable, and the anxiety that Astoria hadn't been able to kick for the past few days finally started to dissipate. "Thanks for making this, Harry," she said after a few minutes. It really wasn't very good, but it was still one of the best meals she'd ever had. No problem. She could tell from the expression on his face that he wasn't particularly impressed with his culinary creation either, but that was one of the things she loved about him. "It's a shame we don't have any wine, though." "Ah," he said, the faintest hint of a smile touching his lips. "I did plan that far ahead, at least." From seemingly nowhere, Harry pulled a bottle of wine from the air and to the table, pouring it into 2 glasses she didn't remember seeing. "Ooh," Astoria clapped. "It's like a dinner and a magic show wrapped into one." "I had to compensate for the overcooked pasta somehow," she laughed. "So you do know it's overcooked." He shrugged guiltily, and she took a slow sip of wine from her glass, being sure to savor it. She didn't have enough experience with wine to know if it was good or not, but she had enough experience with Harry to know it was probably inordinately expensive. It was a little too bitter for her taste, but she resisted the urge to grimace as she swallowed it down. If she was going to die, she was going to die classy. They finished the rest of their dinner in peace, and Astoria was grateful that what little she ate wasn't threatening to come back up again. Which, she supposed, was another point to the theory that her nausea had stemmed from Harry's absence and not her curse. They had since moved to the living room to relax, and she was snuggling into Harry's side on the couch when he finally spoke up again. "Astoria, there's something I need to tell you." She peeked up at him, and in a moment all of her nervous anxiety came back in a rush. "Yeah, I love you." Those 3 little words caused Astoria's heart to beat a single beat so hard she thought it was the beginning of another episode, but after a few deep breaths she managed to steady herself a bit. "I thought you might," she said, her voice shaking only slightly, "but I wasn't certain. I wish I could say the same, but I think I knew for a while I just wasn't able to admit it." She buried her head back into his side. "I love you too," she mumbled, her voice coming out muffled against his shirt. "But I'm guessing you already knew that. I made it a little more obvious than you did." Harry laughed, and she felt his whole body shake against hers. "I might have had an inkling," he admitted. They fell into a comfortable silence then, both enjoying each other's wordless company, and Astoria knew there was no happiness more complete than this. "I'm sorry we didn't have enough time together," she said eventually, raising her head to look at him. We could have had 1,000 years and it still wouldn't have been enough. That's sweet, she giggled. I'm also sorry I couldn't give you anything in return for all that you gave me. Harry shook his head. You gave me everything. You gave me joy, a purpose, and a reason to live. None of the trivialities I paid for can come close to that. Well, then I guess I'm just sorry that I have to leave you. He gave her a gentle smile and leaned down to place a kiss on the top of her forehead. Her cheeks tinged red, and it was a few moments before she spoke again. Harry. Yeah. Can I make one final request? Anything. She rose from the couch and took his hand, leading him quietly to the bedroom. She hadn't ever been inside before, but it was just as plain and featureless as she had been expecting. I want to spend a bit more time with you, she said, turning around to face him. And I want to give you the only thing I have left to give. She forced herself to look into his eyes even as her embarrassment made her want to turn away. She needed Harry to see her resolve. He swallowed heavily, and she could see in his face that he understood her intention. Are you sure? Instead of replying, she pulled him gently to the bed. He sat on the edge and she carefully pushed him down. Now's your chance to ask me to stop, she said quietly, leaning over to kiss his mouth. I can't ask you that. She kissed him again and then started fiddling with the bottom of her shirt. Then let me thank you for everything, one last time. As she lay in bed next to Harry, exhausted, sore, and entirely unclothed, Astoria was only somewhat mortified. She had talked a big game, but in the end was pretty awkward, and she was relatively certain Harry hadn't actually finished. Her pain tolerance was usually on the upper end of terrifying, but she had found tonight's activities rather difficult, and Harry had been nothing if not a gentleman. She was only somewhat mortified, though, because another, much larger part of her was filled with such a divine sense of satisfaction that she almost didn't care how ineptly things had gone. She'd have to ask for Harry's opinion before they left, but she was under the impression that the entire experience had been rather amazing, despite the hiccups. When she felt as though she had basked long enough, Astoria turned on her side and tapped Harry's bare chest with her fingers. As much as she wanted to stay there with him until the end, she didn't want him to wake up in the morning next to a cold body. Harry, my love, she whispered. Wake up. You have to take me back now. I don't have much time left. She waited a moment, but no reply came from the boy next to her. Harry, she whispered again. She shook him gently, but he didn't stir. With immediate alarm, she sat bolt upright in bed, shaking Harry less gently this time. His eyes were shut serenely, but it was clear from the stillness of his body that he wasn't just sleeping. The pieces came together with a sinking feeling in her stomach. Harry, she yelled, her voice growing desperate. Wake up, Harry, please. Even as she screamed, the boy lay motionless beside her. Harry, her voice cracked. What did you do? Harry blinked awake, and it took his brain a few seconds to catch up and recall what he was doing in bed with Astoria. Or rather, what he had done in bed with Astoria. He smiled at the memory, before glancing down at the girl sprawled on top of him. There were dried tear streaks down her face, and she slept fitfully, but he could feel the hot air against his skin as she breathed, and that's all that mattered. Her blonde hair tickled him as it splayed out carelessly across his chest and the bed, but he didn't mind, and he ran his fingers through it while he waited for her to wake up. Eventually she stirred, making some interesting little noises as she slowly came to. Harry, she said, rubbing her eyes. Morning. She blinked a few times as if wondering if she was still dreaming, but a moment later she enveloped him in a big hug, which was rather easy seeing as how her arms were already wrapped around him. Harry, she cried. You scared me to death. I thought you. She froze in the middle of her sentence and a blank expression of shock crossed her features. She stared down at herself, remembered she had nothing on, blushed, and then looked back up at Harry. I don't get it, she stammered. It's not possible. How am I here? Harry raised an eyebrow. Do you mean my apartment or the bedroom? Because while I brought us to the apartment, I'm blaming you for the bedroom. No, how am I still alive? She gave him a wary look. Harry, what did you do? You make it sound like I did something bad, he laughed, though she was still staring at him suspiciously. All I did was a bit of magic, or rather, all we did was a bit of magic, and now I'm relatively certain your curse is gone. That's all. Happy birthday, by the way. She blinked a few more times. But the curse is supposed to be incurable, she protested, still refusing to believe Harry. Everyone said so. There's some magic out there that everyone doesn't know about. From Dumbledore's journals, Harry shook his head. I picked this one up from Voldemort, actually. Astoria's eyes widened in surprise. What? You're serious? He nodded. No one's supposed to know this, but Voldemort used a very rare and very forbidden type of magic to extend his lifespan. By killing others, he was able to fracture his soul and store the pieces in other objects, essentially keeping him alive forever until they were destroyed. You killed someone, Harry. No, so don't look at me like that. But I got to thinking that if he could split his soul, I could too. It was a bit tricky, and I honestly wasn't sure if it would work, and yet here we are. Does that mean we're like Voldemort now? Harry laughed. Not even close. Magic feeds off of intent. Voldemort used murder as a catalyst to extend his lifespan, and that's very dark magic. I used love as a catalyst to share my own. As dangerous as that was, I don't think our souls will be punished for it. But then, Astoria slowly put the pieces together in her head, and she unattached herself from Harry, sitting bolt upright in bed. Wait, you shared your lifespan. Technically, I shared my soul, but that's the basic idea. But then you, he shrugged. I didn't need all of it anyway. She collapsed back onto him, and a weak fist came crashing into his chest. You idiot, she said. You could have lived a full life. It wouldn't have been very full without you. His words almost made her smile, but she resisted the urge because she was still angry with him and he needed to know it. And what were you going to do if your spell didn't work? She scolded. You could have died. He shrugged again, glancing down at her. Astoria's little otter tattoo stood out against her pale skin and the faint outline of her ribcage, and he smiled at the memory of their time together. I suppose it wouldn't have been the worst way to go. She followed his eyes down her body, and she blushed again. You're an idiot, she grumbled, covering up by flattening herself against him. Are you feeling okay now, at least? I feel great, he said honestly, putting his arms back around her. Better than I've felt in a long, long time. I feel like I've actually won for once. I actually feel motivated to get out there and do stuff again, go back to making what difference I can. You'd have had a lot more time to make a difference if you didn't save me. Harry bit his lip and shook his head. How could I have done anything for anyone if I wasn't even able to save the girl I loved? Fighting against the odds for what's right is what makes me me, and I'd almost forgotten that until very recently. I don't regret anything. I'd rather live half a lifetime with you than a full one without. This time, Astoria did smile. It was hard to stay mad at him when he said things like that, even ignoring the small matter of him saving her life. So you do love me then? Of course. That's a relief, she sighed. I was starting to wonder if you just told me that last night to get me into bed for your catalyst to work. Absolutely not. He pulled her in a little closer. I wouldn't play with your feelings like that. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the spell or the catalyst, but I knew you'd have tried to stop me. She raised an eyebrow at him that said obviously, and he gave her a guilty smile. And for the record, I had a wonderful time last night. If you're up for it, we can try again sometime in the future. Astoria's face flushed and she fidgeted. I'd like that, but I might need a few days to recover first. He laughed again, and she delighted at the sound. There's no rush. We can do whatever we like now, we have time. Wow, Astoria let out a deep breath. She had never really considered having time before, and she found herself excited at the prospect. She turned her head up to look at him. What should we do with it? Anything, and you don't have to spend it with me either. I want it to be clear that no matter what happens, I'll never. She shimmied up to Harry's face and kissed him. Shut up, she said. We're spending our time together, whether you like it or not. He laughed, and they kissed again. That suits me just fine. When they finally broke apart, Astoria rolled onto her back next to Harry. She grabbed his hand, and they both just stared at the ceiling, countless possibilities for the future running through their minds. Eventually, Astoria spoke up again. Phew, she said, letting out an overwhelmed little sigh. I'm going to need a longer bucket list.
Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to my channel.